Welcome back. This is Midnight Crime. Most of you fall asleep before the end, so hit subscribe now so you don't miss tomorrow's case. And before we begin, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you tuning in from? Now, let's head straight into our first story. Story 1. At 6:44 a.m., Brian Fletcher stepped onto his porch to grab the morning paper. He walked toward his car, unaware that his neighbor's doorbell camera had been spray-painted black overnight. He didn't see the movement in the dense shrubbery beside his driveway as he reached for his keys. That was the last time Brian was seen. It would be 5 days before the police issued a silver alert for his disappearance. The search of Brian Fletcher's residence began on day 6, 9:15 a.m., when Detective Sarah Westbrook obtained the warrant. The house stood unchanged from the morning of his disappearance. Coffee mug still on the kitchen counter, a spoon lying in the sink basin, the liquid inside the mug long since congealed into a thin film. She moved methodically through the front hallway, boots on the hardwood, documenting the entry point. The door lock showed no signs of forced entry. The deadbolt functioned normally. She recorded this in her notebook. 0915HRS. Primary entry secure, no visible compromise. The living room held the ordinary detritus of a middle-aged man living alone. A television remote on the armrest. A newspaper from 5 days prior, folded to the sports section. Westbrook photographed these items before moving to the desk near the bay window. Inside the desk's top drawer, she found financial documents, bank statements, utility bills, a property tax notice dated 3 weeks prior. She photographed each, noting dates and account numbers. The statements spanned back 8 months, routine deposits from an employer, routine withdrawals for living expenses. Nothing irregular jumped from the page. The second drawer contained what appeared to be personal correspondence. Tax forms from the previous year. A car insurance policy. Westbrook opened the insurance document and recorded the dates. Coverage active, no lapses noted. At 9:47 a.m., she moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator contained the expected contents of an unattended home. A carton of milk with an expiration date 3 days prior, several takeout containers in varying states of decomposition, a package of lunch meat she did not open. She photographed the interior, noting timestamps on nothing that appeared fresh. The freezer held frozen dinners and ice. Nothing else. She checked the pantry. Canned goods, cereal, a loaf of bread, now inedible. She noted the lack of any unusual substances, any containers out of place. At 10:04 a.m., Westbrook moved to the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets unwashed for what appeared to be several days. A single pillow bore the indentation of a head. She did not disturb the linens, but photographed them. She checked beneath the bed. Dust, a single sock, nothing else. The bedroom closet held clothing on hangers. She examined the floor systematically. Shoes arranged in a loose row. Boxes stacked on the upper shelf. She did not pull the boxes down, but looked carefully at the shelf itself. Dust accumulated on the wood surface, undisturbed except for. She leaned closer. 2 parallel lines where something had sat recently. The dust cleared in rectangular patterns. She photographed this, the overhead light illuminating the marks clearly. At 10:22 a.m., she examined the nightstand. The drawer held reading glasses, a paperback novel, a bottle of antacids, and a spiral notebook. She opened the notebook carefully. Inside, Brian Fletcher's handwriting covered perhaps 15 pages in chronological order, dating back 4 weeks. The entries were brief and factual. Asterisk March 28th. Noticed 2 charges on visa I didn't authorize. each $47.99. Called Credit Card Company. Asterisk. Asterisk March 29th. Card Fraud Department assigned case number. New card arriving April 2 ND. Asterisk. Asterisk April 1st. Received replacement card. Earlier charges disputed. Asterisk. Asterisk April 4th. Two more charges appeared on old account. $89.50 and $62.15. Attempted to call, but account flagged as closed. Asterisk. Asterisk April 8th. Emailed credit card fraud resolution team. No response yet. Called twice. On hold each time over 30 minutes. Asterisk. Asterisk April 10th. Decided to monitor statements more closely. Pulling old records to check for earlier fraudulent activity. Asterisk. Asterisk April 14th. Found something in old statements. There's a pattern. Small charges from October through December that I missed initially. Averaging $40 to $60 per charge, occurring mid-month. Approximately 18 to 20 charges total over that period. Asterisk. Asterisk April 15th. Visited library today. Printed all statements from last year. Brought copies home. Planning to organize timeline. Asterisk. Westbrook photographed every page of the notebook. She noted the final entry was dated April 15th, one day before his disappearance. She continued searching the nightstand. Beneath the notebook, she found a manila folder. Inside were printed bank statements, organized in chronological order by month. Each statement had been marked with a highlighter, specific transactions circled in blue ink. She counted the marked entries, 19 charges spanning October through December of the previous year, each between $39 and $98. The charges originated from various online retailers, a photography equipment supplier, an electronics component seller, an industrial tool distributor, a craft supply chain, and others. At 10:51 a.m., she photographed every marked statement, focusing on the transaction details and merchant names. In the folder's side pocket, she found a handwritten list on notebook paper. The heading read, "Card used, possible pattern." Below it, Brian had written, "Last four digits, 7823. Visa assigned to this account since 2019. All marked charges made with same card. Cross-checked all charges with my own purchases, none match. Each charge approximately 3 to 7 days after large deposit from paycheck. Frequency, every 2 to 3 weeks, multiple charges per instance." Westbrook noted the specificity of his observations. Fletcher was methodical. He had documented his suspicion rather than acted impulsively. At 11:13 a.m., she examined the floor beneath the nightstand. Dust and the outline of the piece's feet undisturbed. She moved to the bedroom window. The lock engaged properly. The pane showed no signs of contact or disturbance. The second bedroom, which appeared to function as an office, contained a desk, a computer monitor, and a printer. Westbrook turned on the computer. It required a password. She did not attempt to bypass it, but noted the presence of the equipment and photographed the desk surface. On the desk surface itself, she found an electrical outlet strip with 4 connected devices: the monitor, the printer, the CPU unit, and a wireless router. All 3 remained plugged in, the power indicator lights dark. She photographed this configuration. Beneath the desk, a cardboard box contained printed documents. She withdrew them carefully. Additional bank statements, printouts of online account activity, and what appeared to be a personal investigation. The documents were dated across the past 30 days. Fletcher had clearly expanded his research beyond the spiral notebook. One document bore the header, "Timeline of Fraudulent Activity, Revised Analysis." Below it, he had reconstructed the discovered charges in table format, listing date, amount, merchant name, and category. At the bottom of the page, in parentheses, he had written, asterisk, someone with access to card details. How? Not stolen in traditional sense. Card was in my possession the entire time. Debit card also shows no activity. Only Visa. How were details obtained? Online purchase? Breach? Employee at location I visited? Asterisk. At 11:44 a.m., Westbrook photographed this document and continued examining the box. She found printouts from various credit card company help pages, articles about identity theft and fraud, and what appeared to be screenshots of online forums where fraud victims had shared their experiences. One article, printed from a financial website, had been marked heavily with annotations in Fletcher's handwriting. Passages were highlighted, and in the margins, he had written questions. Asterisk, does this match? Asterisk, asterisk, same time frame. Asterisk, asterisk, how many people affected? Asterisk, at 12:03 p.m., Westbrook checked the trash bins in the office. She found crumpled papers, discarded printouts of statements she had already documented, and, preserved carefully at the bottom, a small white envelope bearing only the word receipt in pen. Inside the envelope, she found a printed receipt from a local hardware store. The transaction was dated April 13th, 3 days before his disappearance. The items purchased were listed. Drill bit set, industrial grade. Box cutter blades, 100 pack. Masking tape, 2-inch. Work gloves, medium. Flashlight, LED, rechargeable. The total came to $73.42. The timestamp on the receipt read 2:34 p.m. Westbrook photographed the receipt, front and back. She noted the purchase date in her notebook. She had no context for why Fletcher had bought these items, nor any indication that they had been used. She searched the kitchen drawers again, methodically. In the third drawer, beneath the utensils, she found a new package of work gloves, unopened, the receipt price tag still affixed. Beneath that, she found a flashlight and a box of drill bits. The masking tape was located on a high shelf in the office closet and used. At 12:31 p.m., she stood in the kitchen and documented each discovery. The items had been purchased but not used. They remained stored in or near their original locations. Whatever Fletcher's intention in acquiring them, he had not employed them. The police report filed 3 days before the warrant had noted that Fletcher's vehicle remained in the driveway. Westbrook walked to the garage. The single-car space was empty except for lawn equipment, a workbench, and storage shelves. She photographed the space and examined the workbench surface. It was clean, organized. No tools lay about. Nothing suggested recent activity. At 1:08 p.m., she returned to the house and checked the bathroom. The medicine cabinet contained the expected items: toothpaste, dental floss, over-the-counter pain relievers, a tube of antibiotic ointment. Beneath the sink, she found cleaning supplies and an additional flashlight, identical to the one in the kitchen drawer. At 1:19 p.m., Westbrook sat at Fletcher's kitchen table with the manila folder, the spiral notebook, the timeline document, and the hardware store receipt arranged before her. She photographed the arrangement from above, documenting how the materials had been organized. The pattern was clear. Fletcher had identified suspicious transactions, documented them systematically, researched the issue, and then purchased items, tools of investigation, she presumed, without explanation. The purchases were made but not employed. The investigation had begun but remained incomplete. At 1:31 p.m., Detective Westbrook made a call to the credit card company's fraud department. She provided them with Fletcher's account number and the details from his investigation. The representative on the line confirmed that the account had indeed been compromised. 18 fraudulent charges had been confirmed across October through December. The investigation had been filed by Fletcher himself, and the disputes had been processed. "Did he contact you after the initial dispute?" Westbrook asked. "Yes," the representative confirmed. "He called on April 4th and again on April 8th. Both calls are documented. On the second call, he requested detailed information about where the charges had originated, the IP addresses of the transactions." "Did you provide that information?" "Yes. The charges originated from a single location across multiple transactions, a residential address in a neighboring county." Westbrook noted the address and thanked the representative. At 1:47 p.m., she conducted a final walkthrough of the residence. She found nothing new. The house remained as it had been, ordinary, quiet, and incomplete. Whatever Brian Fletcher had intended to do with those tools, wherever his investigation had been leading him, remained undocumented. The task of finding him had only begun. The residential address provided by the credit card company's fraud department corresponded to a two-story house on Palmetto Drive in the neighboring county, approximately 14 miles from Fletcher's residence. Detective Marcus Webb obtained a second warrant at 3:22 p.m. on day 6 and arrived at the location with a uniformed officer at 4:09 p.m. The house appeared unoccupied. No vehicles occupied the driveway. The lawn had not been mowed in recent weeks. The grass stood approximately 15 centimeters high. Weeds occupied the flower beds along the foundation. Webb photographed the front elevation before approaching the entrance. At the front door, he rang the bell. No response. He waited 4 minutes and rang again. Silence. Webb examined the door frame. The lock showed no visible damage. He moved to the windows along the front of the house, cupping his hand against the glass to see into the interior. The blinds were drawn in every window. He observed no movement, no indication of habitation. At 4:31 p.m., he used the warrant to open the door with a key provided by the property manager. The interior smelled of stale air and something chemical, cleaning products, perhaps, or something else. He noted the odor. The entryway was bare. No coat rack. No shoe organizer. The living room beyond contained minimal furniture, a single sofa, a television on a stand, a lamp. The room appeared staged rather than lived in. Webb photographed each element. He moved through the house methodically. The kitchen contained appliances, but no evidence of recent use. The refrigerator, when opened, was empty save for a single bottle of water. The sink held no dishes. The countertops were bare and clean, wiped down. At 4:51 p.m., Webb climbed the stairs to the second floor. 3 bedrooms opened off a central hallway. He entered the first room and stopped. The room was empty except for a single item, a desk. The desk held a computer monitor, a wireless keyboard, and a mouse. A desk chair sat before it. The monitor was dark. Webb did not touch anything, but photographed the setup from multiple angles. He opened the desk drawers. The first contained cables and power adapters. The second held a stack of blank envelopes and printer paper. The third drawer was empty. Webb looked beneath the desk. An electrical outlet strip provided power to the monitor and keyboard. He did not see the CPU unit. At 5:08 p.m., he checked the second bedroom. It contained no furniture, no equipment, nothing. The carpet showed evidence of dust accumulation near the baseboards and in the corners, but the center of the room appeared recently vacuumed or swept. He photographed the floor pattern. The third bedroom held the same emptiness. He stood in the doorway and observed. walls, carpet, a ceiling fixture, and nothing else. At 5:23 p.m., Webb returned to the first bedroom and examined the desk more carefully. He photographed the monitor's position relative to the window. He noted the chair's position. He looked at the carpet around the desk. The pile showed compression marks from the chair's wheels, multiple marks indicating repeated movement. He checked behind the monitor. The power cable ran from the electrical outlet to the monitor. A USB cable ran from the monitor to the keyboard. There was no computer, no processing unit, nothing that would suggest the monitor had ever been connected to anything other than power. Webb photographed these cables individually. At 5:39 p.m., he searched the closets. The first bedroom's closet was empty. The other bedroom's closets contained no items. He checked for shelving or storage racks. There was none. He returned downstairs and conducted a systematic search of every cabinet, drawer, and storage space. The kitchen yielded nothing beyond standard cookware and unopened packages of items: cereal, pasta, canned beans. The expiration dates on these items spanned a range suggesting they had been purchased at different times, though Webb could not determine precisely when. At 6:04 p.m., he found something in a kitchen cabinet's back corner: a single business card standing upright against the cabinet's rear wall. The card read, "Riverside Property Management, Residential Leasing and Maintenance. Phone 555-0147. Webb photographed the card in place, then removed it carefully and photographed both sides. No handwriting, no markings, no date of printing visible. He called the number from his mobile phone. A woman answered on the third ring. "Riverside Property Management, this is Diana speaking." Webb identified himself and provided the address on Palmetto Drive. "I need to know the leaseholder for this property." "One moment," she said. He heard keyboard sounds. "That property is currently between tenants. The previous lease ended on April 1st. The tenant vacated on March 29th. Who was the previous tenant?" "The lease was held under the name Robert Ashford. He paid month to month after the initial one-year lease expired." "Do you have a forwarding address for Mr. Ashford?" "No. He provided no forwarding address. He simply left the keys and departed." "Did he leave anything behind? Any property?" "Let me check the move-out report." The keyboard sounds resumed. It notes that the property was left in good condition. No damage. No items left behind. It was cleared and cleaned prior to our inspection on March 30th. Webb noted the dates. "And the lease started when?" "August of last year. August 15th. Webb ended the call and stood in the kitchen of the empty house. The property had been leased by a man named Robert Ashford from August through March. The lease had ended precisely 17 days before Brian Fletcher's disappearance. During that 9-month period, someone, presumably Ashford, had conducted fraudulent transactions using Fletcher's credit card information, with charges originating from this address. At 6:29 p.m., Webb called the property manager again. "I need the details on how Mr. Ashford established the lease. Credit application, references, anything you have." "Certainly. Let me pull that file." He waited. Diana returned after approximately 2 minutes. The lease was secured with first month and a security deposit, totaling $4,200. Paid in cash on August 10th. The credit application was approved based on prior rental history and a letter of reference from a previous landlord. "Do you have that reference letter?" "I do. It states that Mr. Ashford rented from the writer for 2 years, 2022 through 2024, and that he was a reliable tenant, always paid on time, and was respectful of the property. It's signed by a Jennifer Langley at an address in Shelburne County." "Did your office verify that reference?" Typically we call, Diana said. But I'm looking at our notes, and it appears we did not place a verification call for this applicant. The letter was accepted at face value. Webb noted this. No verification. A letter of reference that had been accepted without confirmation. I need a copy of that letter and all information you have on the application, Webb said. At 7:04 p.m., back at his vehicle, Webb received the documents via email. The reference letter was printed on plain white paper, containing no letterhead or official identifying marks. The signature read Jennifer Langley, but the handwriting was standard and offered no distinguishing characteristics. The letter itself was typed. To whom it may concern, I am writing to confirm that Robert Ashford rented residential property from me at 447 Blackberry Lane, Shelburne County, from August 2022 through August 2024. During this time, Mr. Ashford proved to be a responsible and punctual tenant. Rent was paid in full and on time each month. The property was well maintained, and Mr. Ashford caused no disturbances or issues of concern. I recommend him without reservation. Sincerely, Jennifer Langley. Webb photographed the letter and called the address listed, 447 Blackberry Lane, Shelburne County. An elderly woman answered. Webb identified himself and asked if Jennifer Langley lived at that address. This is Jennifer Langley, she said. Ms. Langley, I'm calling to verify a reference you provided for a tenant named Robert Ashford approximately 8 months ago. There was silence on the line. Then, I didn't provide a reference. Webb felt the small shift in the investigation. You didn't write a letter of reference for Mr. Ashford? I don't know any Robert Ashford, and I haven't rented out any property in years. I own my home, but I've never been a landlord. At 7:19 p.m., Webb ended the call. He sat in his vehicle with the printed documents before him. The reference letter had been forged. The previous landlord verification had been fabricated. Robert Ashford had secured a lease under false credentials. He pulled up the property manager's email again and reviewed the credit application. The name given was Robert Ashford. The date of birth listed was May 14th, 1981. The social security number provided was 487-52-3064. The phone number was out of service. Webb ran the social security number through the database. It returned no active records. The number did not correspond to any individual in the system. At 7:41 p.m., he called the property manager once more. Has anyone inquired about the Palmetto Drive property since the lease ended? Not that I'm aware of, Diana said. We've been preparing it for new tenants, but there haven't been any applications yet. Has anyone been inside the property besides you? Just our maintenance crew. They cleaned it on March 30th and conducted a few minor repairs, light bulb replacement, that sort of thing. I'll need the names and dates for everyone who accessed the property after March 29th. At 8:03 p.m., Webb received the maintenance log. 3 individuals had entered the property. Diana herself on March 30th, a maintenance technician named Kevin Hooper on March 30th, and a second maintenance technician named Lisa Provost on April 2nd. All visits were documented with entry times and exit times. All were brief, between 20 and 40 minutes. Webb added these names to his report. He drove back through the county toward Fletcher's residence. The highway stretched empty in the early evening. At 8:47 p.m., he pulled into a parking lot and reviewed the information again. Robert Ashford did not exist, at least not with legitimate identification. Someone had used that name to secure a lease. That person had obtained Fletcher's credit card information. How remained unknown. That person had made fraudulent charges from the Palmetto Drive address. And then, on March 29th, that person had vacated the property, leaving it empty. 17 days later, Brian Fletcher purchased tools, a flashlight, work gloves, drill bits, box cutters, items suited for investigation or breaking into something. 3 days after that, at 6:44 a.m., he had stepped onto his porch and disappeared. The connection existed somewhere in the margins of these facts. Webb did not yet see it clearly. At 9:12 p.m., he received a message from the county records office. The property tax records for Palmetto Drive showed that the house was owned by a real estate investment company called Meridian Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware. The registered agent for the company was listed as a corporate filing service, providing no information about actual ownership or management. Webb made a note to contact the Delaware Secretary of State on the following morning. He drove toward the police station, the highway dark and unbroken ahead of him. At 8:19 a.m. on day 7, Detective Webb contacted the Delaware Secretary of State's office. The representative confirmed that Meridian Holdings LLC had been registered 3 years prior, in April of 2023. The registered agent was listed as Corporate Services Unlimited, a filing company based in Wilmington. Who is the actual owner? Webb asked. That information is not public record unless the owner has chosen to file an amended disclosure. Let me check. The representative paused. There is no disclosure on file. The LLC was registered with the minimum required documentation. The owner could be anyone. Webb thanked her and immediately contacted Corporate Services Unlimited. He was transferred through 2 employees before reaching someone with access to the account information. I can't provide ownership details without a warrant, the representative said. That's privileged information. Webb obtained a warrant by 10:34 a.m. and received the documentation by 11:08 a.m. via email. Meridian Holdings LLC's beneficial owner was listed as Catherine Brennan, with a mailing address in Portland, Oregon. The address was a P.O. box. At 11:31 a.m., Webb ran Catherine Brennan through the national database. 43 results appeared. He filtered by age, narrowing to individuals between 30 and 50 years old. 19 matches remained. He reviewed each photograph and cross-referenced addresses and known associations. One record stood out. Catherine Brennan, age 36, with a previous address in the same county where Palmetto Drive was located. An arrest record from 6 years prior for fraud, specifically credit card fraud. The charges had been reduced to a misdemeanor, and she had completed probation in 2021. The photograph matched no one he had encountered so far. At 12:03 p.m., Webb obtained Catherine Brennan's current registered address from the DMV. The Portland address on file was consistent with the P.O. box. He called the Portland Police Department and requested a welfare check at the residence listed in their records. While waiting for that response, Webb examined the credit card fraud case from 6 years prior. The police report indicated that Brennan had been caught using a stolen credit card at multiple retail locations over a 2-month period. The cardholder, an individual named Thomas Kolowski, had reported the fraudulent activity after receiving his statement. Brennan had been arrested at a shopping mall using the card. Webb noted the methodology, direct in-person use of a stolen card, caught quickly. A crude approach compared to the methodical, remote fraudulent activity targeting Fletcher. At 1:47 p.m., the Portland Police Department called back. The address on file was a residential apartment building. The current tenant at that unit was not Catherine Brennan. The present occupant, a woman named Michelle Garrett, had lived there for 8 months. She had no knowledge of any previous tenant named Brennan. Webb requested that Portland PD check with the building management for forwarding information. At 2:15 p.m., They called back. Catherine Brennan had vacated the apartment 6 months prior, in late October, providing no forwarding address. At 2:33 p.m., Webb contacted the credit card fraud investigator from the earlier case, a detective named Ronald Hutchins who was now retired. Through the department's directory, Webb located a phone number. Hutchins answered on the fourth ring, his voice thin with age. Webb explained the current investigation and asked about Catherine Brennan's case from 6 years prior. "I remember her," Hutchins said. "Young woman, seemed intelligent. First offense. The DA reduced it because she cooperated. She said she'd found the card, that she hadn't stolen it herself. She'd used it a few times before thinking better of it." "Did you believe her?" Webb asked. "No," Hutchins said without hesitation. "She was too composed. She knew too much about how to use the card without getting caught. She was buying small items, using it in busy locations, keeping transactions under certain amounts. That's not the behavior of someone who found a card and impulse bought things. That's someone who'd done it before." "Was she ever linked to other fraud cases?" "Not that I know of, but we didn't dig deep. The case resolved quickly, and she served her time." Webb thanked him and ended the call. At 3:08 p.m., Webb obtained Catherine Brennan's phone records from 6 years prior, using historical documentation requests. The records showed activity through the date of her arrest, then nothing. No phone service afterward. He requested her complete criminal history beyond the fraud conviction. The results showed only that single case. No priors, no subsequent charges, at least not under that name. At 3:44 p.m., Webb stood in his office with printed photographs and documents spread across his desk. He arranged them in chronological order. Catherine Brennan's arrest photograph from 6 years ago, the Palmetto Drive property lease application listing Robert Ashford, the forged reference letter signed Jennifer Langley, the credit card transactions attributed to Fletcher's account. The connection was not immediate. The names were different. The methodologies appeared distinct. Crude fraud 6 years prior versus sophisticated remote fraud in the current case. But the pattern suggested a single individual adapting her approach over time. At 4:02 p.m., Webb requested additional information from the state police database. Any fraud cases, identity theft cases, or financial crimes reported in the Tri-County region over the past 5 years. The search returned 17 cases. He reviewed each one methodically. Case 1. A woman reported unauthorized purchases on her debit card, total amount $340, spanning March through May 2022. The case was closed unsolved. Case 2. A man reported credit card fraud, $1,200 in unauthorized transactions from a single vendor, June 2022. The card issuer reversed the charges. Case closed. Case 3. An elderly woman reported identity theft, fraudulent accounts opened in her name. Total liability $8,500, discovered in August 2022. The matter had been referred to federal authorities. Webb paused on Case 3 and requested the detailed report. The victim, Margaret Alden, age 73, had discovered that someone had applied for a credit card using her social security number and date of birth. The application had been approved and used at various retailers before being detected by a fraud alert system. The victim had reported it to the credit card company and to police. The report noted that Margaret Alden lived approximately 5 kilometers from where Catherine Brennan had previously resided. Webb pulled Margaret Alden's current information and called her. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Alden, I'm Detective Webb with the state police. I'm investigating financial crimes in your region. I wanted to follow up on the identity theft case you reported in 2022. That was resolved," she said, her voice cautious. The credit card company took care of it. I understand. I'm simply verifying some details. Did you ever discover who committed the fraud? No. They said it was handled, and I didn't press further. I'm 73 years old. I didn't want the hassle. Has anything similar happened since then? There was a pause. Actually, yes. About 2 years ago, I received a phone call from someone claiming to be from my bank. They said my account had been compromised and they needed to verify information. I hung up. I called the bank directly, and they confirmed no such call had been placed. But it was disturbing. Webb wrote this down. Did you receive any mail around that time? Anything suspicious? I did receive a couple of pieces of mail addressed to names I didn't recognize, but I assumed they were addressed to the previous owner. I threw them out. Do you remember the names on those pieces of mail? No, not exactly, but one was addressed to a woman. I remember thinking that was odd because the previous owner was a man. At 5:19 p.m., Webb obtained the details of Margaret Alden's previous addresses and confirmed that she had lived at the same residence for the past 12 years. Prior to that, according to property records, the house had been rented to various tenants. He requested the names of those tenants for the period 2 years before Catherine Brennan's arrest, 6 to 8 years prior. The property management company that had handled the rental at that time was no longer in business, but Webb located the owner's personal records. The tenants during that period included a couple named David and Patricia Hollis, a single man named George Nakamura, and a woman who had rented the property for a 6-month period under the name Sarah Matheson. Webb ran Sarah Matheson through the database. No criminal records appeared. The name generated 12 possible matches across the state. None of the photographs matched Catherine Brennan's appearance. At 5:52 p.m., Webb requested the lease documentation for Sarah Matheson from the property owner. The lease had been executed 6 years and 4 months prior. It listed a phone number that was no longer in service and a mailing address that appeared to be another P.O. box, this time in a different state. The lease had been brief, terminated after 6 months. The property owner noted in his records that Matheson had left suddenly, providing minimal notice and leaving the property in good condition. Webb stood at his window, looking out at the parking lot below. The timeline was becoming clearer. 6 years and 4 months ago, Catherine Brennan, or someone using that name, had rented a property near Margaret Alden's residence. During that time, she had obtained Margaret Alden's personal information, applied for credit in her name, and committed fraud. 8 months later, she had been arrested under the name Catherine Brennan after using a stolen credit card. After her probation ended, she had disappeared. Then, 3 years ago, a Delaware LLC had been registered in the name of Catherine Brennan, with a mailing address in Portland, Oregon. 6 months after that, she had rented the Palmetto Drive property under the alias Robert Ashford, a name that did not exist in any database. And from that property, someone had committed fraud against Brian Fletcher. At 6:28 p.m., Webb requested access to the Palmetto Drive property once more. He arrived with a search team at 7:04 p.m. and conducted a more detailed forensic examination. They photographed every surface, dusted for fingerprints, and examined the desk and empty rooms for any overlooked evidence. In the second bedroom, on the carpet beneath the window, the forensic technician discovered a small fragment of material. It was white, approximately 2 centimeters in length, with a smooth texture on one side and adhesive residue on the other. Webb photographed it and placed it in an evidence bag. Tape, the technician said. Packing tape, possibly. Something was attached to the wall here. Webb examined the wall beneath the window. The paint showed no obvious marks, but under the ultraviolet lamp, Faint residue became visible, a rectangular outline approximately 30 centimeters by 40 centimeters, running parallel to the window frame. Whatever had hung there had been removed cleanly, but not perfectly. At 7:41 p.m., Webb conducted a final search of the house. In the first bedroom, behind the desk, he discovered a second small fragment, this one pink, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter, with a sticky surface. He photographed it and bagged it. In the kitchen, beneath the cabinet where he had found the business card, he discovered a second card, partially hidden behind a baseboard. This card bore identical formatting to the first, but was creased and damaged, as if it had been dropped and kicked. Webb photographed it in place and removed it carefully. At 8:04 p.m., back at his vehicle, Webb examined both business cards. They were identical, Riverside Property Management, the same phone number. But the second card bore a handwritten note on the back in blue ballpoint pen. 3MO renewal. Ask about discounts. Someone, presumably Robert Ashford or whoever that identity was, had been considering renewing the lease. Webb called the property manager again. When would a 3-month renewal have been due on the Palmetto Drive lease? Diana consulted her records. If the lease was set to expire on April 1st as stated, a 3-month renewal would have needed to be discussed by mid-March. But Mr. Ashford never inquired about renewal? No, he simply vacated. At 8:33 p.m., Webb returned to the police station. He updated his case file with every piece of information. Catherine Brennan's fraud history, her disappearance from Portland 6 months prior, the properties she may have occupied under false names, the pattern of fraud spanning years, the Palmetto Drive lease, the fraudulent charges against Fletcher, the tools Fletcher had purchased, and his disappearance. Somewhere in this network of aliases, false documents, and untraceable movements, Brian Fletcher had found something. He had purchased tools, and then he had vanished. At 9:18 p.m., Webb sat in his office with the evidence bags containing the tape fragments and the business card. The investigation had expanded beyond a missing person. The threads now extended backward through years, through multiple identities, through carefully constructed deceptions. He had not yet found Brian Fletcher, but he was beginning to understand the world into which Fletcher had stepped. At 8:47 a.m. on day 12, Detective Webb received a call from the Delaware Secretary of State's office. The representative informed him that Meridian Holdings LLC had filed an amended disclosure form the previous evening, adding a secondary owner, James Richardson, an accountant based in the same county where Palmetto Drive was located. Webb pulled James Richardson's information. Age 52. No criminal record. Married. 3 adult children. His business, Richardson Financial Services, had been operating for 18 years. The office was located in a commercial complex 2 kilometers from Palmetto Drive. At 9:34 a.m., Webb drove to the business address. The office was modest, a single room on the second floor of a building that housed tax preparation services and a real estate agent. The door bore Richardson's name in black lettering. Webb did not enter. Instead, he sat in his vehicle and reviewed the timeline once more. Catherine Brennan had disappeared from Portland in October of the previous year, approximately 6 months prior. The Palmetto Drive property had been occupied until March 29th. The fraudulent charges against Fletcher had begun in October, months before Ashford had leased the property. Webb pulled the credit card company's records again and examined the IP address data more carefully. The representative had provided a single location for the fraudulent transactions, but Webb requested a more detailed breakdown. At 10:02 a.m., the company sent an updated analysis. The fraudulent charges had originated from multiple IP addresses, but all had been routed through the same internet service provider serving the Tri-County region. The charges had begun in October. Catherine Brennan had disappeared in October. The Palmetto Drive property had been occupied since August. Webb's mind moved through the sequence. Someone had established a lease under a false identity in August. That person had obtained Fletcher's credit card information and begun fraudulent transactions in October. The lease had ended in March. The person had vanished. Then Fletcher had purchased tools and disappeared. At 10:31 a.m., Webb obtained a warrant to examine James Richardson's financial records. By 11:15 a.m., he had received documentation from the accountant's business bank account. The account showed deposits of approximately $8,000 monthly, consistent with typical accounting fees. But there was an anomaly. In late March, a deposit of $18,500 had been made from an entity labeled Property Holdings LLC. Webb cross-referenced the LLC identification number. It corresponded to Meridian Holdings. At 11:52 a.m., Webb called James Richardson's office. A woman answered, presumably his assistant. "Is Mr. Richardson available?" Webb asked. "He's not in today. He's working from home. May I take a message?" Webb did not leave a message. Instead, he obtained Richardson's home address and drove there directly. The house was a 3-bedroom suburban residence in a quiet neighborhood. A vehicle was parked in the driveway, a gray sedan. Webb parked on the street and approached the front door. He rang the bell. After approximately 30 seconds, the door opened. James Richardson stood in the entryway, wearing a cardigan and slippers. His expression shifted from neutral to uncertain when Webb identified himself. "I'm here regarding Meridian Holdings LLC," Webb said. "May I ask you a few questions?" Richardson's jaw tightened. "I think I should have a lawyer present for this conversation." "You can, certainly. But I'm simply asking about your involvement with the LLC. No accusations at this point." Richardson considered this, then stepped aside. Webb entered the house and followed him into a sitting room. The house was orderly, decorated in muted tones. Family photographs lined a shelf. Richardson with a woman and 3 young adults, all smiling in what appeared to be a vacation setting. "The LLC owns a property on Palmetto Drive," Webb began. "Can you explain your involvement?" "It's a rental property," Richardson said. His hands rested on his lap, unmoving. "I registered it as a secondary owner approximately a year ago when I decided to expand into real estate investment." "Who was the primary owner?" "Catherine Brennan." Richardson did not respond immediately. His eyes moved toward a window. Finally, Catherine was a business associate. She handled the day-to-day management of the property. "Where is Catherine Brennan now?" "I don't know. She terminated our business relationship several months ago." Webb noted the careful language. "You reported a payment from Meridian Holdings to your personal account in late March. $18,500. What was that payment for?" "An investment withdrawal," Richardson said. "Catherine paid me back for some initial capital I had contributed." At 12:27 p.m., Webb left the residence without pressing further. He had no concrete evidence of a crime from Richardson, merely a connection to Meridian Holdings and an indirect connection to Catherine Brennan. But the pieces were aligning in a pattern Webb could not yet articulate. That evening, at 6:19 p.m., Webb sat in his office with the original hardware store receipt from Fletcher's residence. He had reviewed it multiple times, but had focused on the items purchased rather than the transaction itself. He examined it again. The receipt was dated April 13th. The timestamp read 2:34 p.m. The store location was listed as Home Depot, store number 247, 19 Oak Street. Webb called the Home Depot location and spoke with the manager. He provided the receipt number and transaction date. "Can you tell me if this transaction was captured on your security cameras?" Webb asked. "We maintain 60 days of footage," the manager said. "April 13th would still be archived. I can pull it for you if you have a warrant." Webb obtained a warrant by 7:04 p.m. and watched the security footage at 8:11 p.m. in the manager's office. The timestamp showed 2:34 p.m. on April 13th. The camera angle covered the checkout register. A man Webb recognized as Brian Fletcher stepped up to the counter with the items: drill bit set, work gloves, flashlight, masking tape, and box cutter blades. He paid with a credit card. The transaction completed, but the camera angle also captured the area behind the registers. In that space, approximately 4 meters away, stood another customer. Webb watched as that person turned. It was Catherine Brennan, or a woman matching the photograph Webb had obtained from the database. She stood in the aisle, examining paint cans, completely unaware of the camera's view. She was approximately 5 meters from Fletcher. Webb replayed the footage. Brennan stood in the same location for 4 minutes while Fletcher completed his transaction. Their eyes never met. No interaction occurred, but they were in the same store at the same moment, with Fletcher purchasing tools that suggested an intention to investigate something. At 8:43 p.m., Webb obtained additional security footage from different camera angles. A second camera captured Brennan walking through the store approximately 6 minutes before Fletcher arrived. She had selected 2 items, a can of paint and a paintbrush, and had purchased them at a different register. The timestamps showed Brennan had departed at 2:29 p.m., 5 minutes before Fletcher arrived. The footage showed her walking to a vehicle in the parking lot, a gray sedan. The license plate was partially visible in the camera frame. Webb ran the plate. It was registered to James Richardson. At 9:22 p.m., Webb sat in absolute stillness, the footage frozen on his screen. The connection crystallized. Catherine Brennan had leased the Palmetto Drive property under the identity Robert Ashford. From that property, she, or someone under her direction, had conducted fraud against Fletcher using his credit card information. She had operated the scheme from August through March. James Richardson had been her partner, providing financial backing and using his LLC to establish legitimacy. In March, the lease had ended. Brennan had disappeared. Richardson had received a payment, the liquidation of their joint investment. But Fletcher had discovered the fraud. He had documented it meticulously. He had purchased tools, investigating tools, tools for accessing locked spaces or gathering evidence. And on April 13th, he had shopped in the same store where Brennan was shopping, their paths crossing by coincidence or by design. Webb pulled the maintenance logs from the Palmetto Drive property. 3 individuals had accessed the house after the lease ended. Diana from the property management company, Kevin Hooper the maintenance technician, and Lisa Provost the maintenance technician. Webb ran background checks on both technicians. Kevin Hooper returned nothing remarkable, but Lisa Provost had been hired by Riverside Property Management only 6 weeks prior. Her employment file was minimal. Her social security number checked out, but Webb requested a photograph. At 10:04 p.m., Riverside Property Management sent him the file. The photograph showed a woman with light brown hair, approximately 35 years old. The name on the employment form was Lisa Provost, but the photograph was Catherine Brennan. At 10:31 p.m., Webb called Riverside Property Management. Diana answered. "I need to know the exact dates and times when Lisa Provost accessed the Palmetto Drive property," Webb said. Diana consulted the log. She was there on April 2nd at 2:15 p.m., and exited at 2:47 p.m. April 2nd, for days before Fletcher purchased his tools. 8 days before he disappeared, Webb requested the details of what maintenance Lisa Provost had performed during that visit. The log shows she replaced light bulbs in the second and third bedrooms, Diana said. Webb had photographed those rooms. The light fixtures had appeared standard, the bulbs functional. But the carpet in the second bedroom had shown the vacuum marks, fresh disturbance, evidence that something had been removed. At 11:19 p.m., Webb made a final call to the credit card fraud department. He asked for the precise dates when the fraudulent charges against Fletcher had ceased. The last fraudulent charge was on March 25th, the representative confirmed. After that date, no further charges appeared on the account. March 25th was the date when the Palmetto Drive lease was set to expire. The fraud had stopped because the operation had been shut down. The lease had ended. The equipment had been removed. And Catherine Brennan, using the identity Lisa Provost, had accessed the property one final time on April 2nd, accessing something, removing something, or ensuring that everything was gone. Webb pulled the hardware store footage once more. He focused on the timestamp, April 13th, 2:34 p.m. Fletcher had purchased tools suited for investigation or forced entry. 4 days later, on April 17th, at 6:44 a.m., he had stepped onto his porch and disappeared. The pieces assembled themselves in Webb's mind with the clarity of inevitability. Fletcher had discovered the fraud. He had documented it. He had learned, through whatever means, that the operation had been based at Palmetto Drive. He had purchased tools. He had attempted to access that property or to gather evidence from it. And Catherine Brennan, the architect of a sophisticated fraud scheme operating under multiple identities across years, had prevented him from doing so. Webb opened his laptop and began typing his supplementary report. He detailed the connection between Catherine Brennan and James Richardson. He explained the fraudulent scheme. He documented the financial transactions, the false identities, the pattern of deception spanning years. But the location of Brian Fletcher remained unknown. The motive for his disappearance, whether to protect the fraud operation, whether out of self-defense, or whether from some other impulse, could not be determined from evidence alone. At 12:34 a.m., Webb filed a warrant for Catherine Brennan's arrest. He filed a second warrant for James Richardson, and he sent his completed investigative report to the district attorney's office with a note requesting that a federal investigation be opened into the structured fraud operation. The investigation had revealed the perpetrators and their method, but it had not returned Brian Fletcher. Webb sat in his office with his hands folded on his desk. The silence around him was the silence of completion without resolution. Facts had been assembled. Connections had been established. A case had been built. But the fundamental question, where is Brian Fletcher, remained unanswered, suspended in the darkness beyond the reach of documentation and procedure. Story 2. A freelance graphic designer ordered a laptop for her home office, worth $2,400. The tracking showed it was delivered and signed for by someone named R. Peterson at her apartment building. She'd never signed for anything. Over the next few weeks, she discovered at least a dozen packages missing from her building's lobby, all supposedly delivered to different residents. The detective's first observation came from the building manager, who pulled the lobby access logs on a Tuesday afternoon. The spreadsheet covered 6 weeks and showed every swipe of a key card entering through the side entrance, the one residence used instead of the main doors. She scrolled through the names methodically. Tenants swiped in, maintenance personnel, delivery drivers with codes. But there, on 17 separate dates across that 6-week period, The log registered a swipe at 2:43 a.m., 3:19 a.m., 4:07 a.m., always between midnight and dawn, from a card assigned to Unit 604. Unit 604 was vacant, had been vacant for 8 months. The detective stood in the lobby itself. Fluorescent panels overhead hummed at a frequency just audible if you stopped moving. Gray tile flooring, buffed to a shine that reflected the panels back at the ceiling. 2 leather seating areas with cushions that held the impression of weight long after someone had left them. Behind the reception desk, a closed-circuit camera mounted in the corner, its lens dusty. The manager explained the system had failed 3 weeks prior. No one had called to fix it yet. She requested the key card assigned to 604. It arrived in an envelope with a property office log showing it had been deactivated 2 months ago, but never physically recovered. The manager checked the records. The tenant who'd moved out had returned it electronically through the building's system, according to the timestamp, but the physical card remained somewhere in the building's inventory or had simply gone missing. The next step was the packages themselves. The designer, whose name was Melissa Huang, had filed a police report, but the responding officer had documented only the missing laptop. The detective compiled a different list. She went door to door with a photograph of the delivery manifest data, asking which residents had reported missing items in the past 6 weeks. 12 confirmed. 11 more who said they'd received notifications their packages were left in a safe place, but found nothing in their units. The descriptions matched, all high-value items. A television, a tablet, wireless headphones, a coffee machine worth $400, a camera lens, everything between $200 and $3,000. She examined the building's layout. The lobby connected to a hallway leading to the mailroom, a utility closet, and the stairwell. The mailroom had a separate entrance from the loading dock. She photographed the mailroom door, pine with a brass handle, weathered. The jamb around the lock showed fresh tool marks. Not deep gouges, but parallel scratches in the brass, fine lines where something metal had wedged and worked the mechanism. She photographed them with a ruler beside each mark. The utility closet held cleaning supplies, a breaker panel, and 3 shelves of miscellaneous building hardware. She noted what was present: mops, buckets, bottles of industrial cleaner, a stepladder, boxes of light bulbs, spare outlet covers. She photographed the arrangement, then photographed it again from different angles. Something was absent rather than present. A space on the lower shelf where items had been removed and not replaced, the coating of dust around the absent objects marking its boundary with sharp precision. The loading dock outside connected to the alley. The door was a heavy metal frame with rubber seals and a magnetic lock. The detective examined the seal. It showed compression marks, but no scratches or prying damage. Instead, she found a small rubber wedge in the corner of the dock, the kind used in doors to hold them slightly ajar, the kind janitors used when moving items in and out. She photographed it, then checked the magnetic lock's installation. The wiring ran through conduit into the wall. She followed it visually and noted that a section of conduit near the lock had been stripped of its outer jacket, exposing the wires inside. In the stairwell, she climbed to the 3rd floor and examined the space near the 604 unit. The hallway carpet showed a faint wear pattern, footprints worn into the fibers leading from the stairwell to the unit door, then back toward the stairs again. The door itself bore no scratches. The lock appeared untouched, but the doormat outside the unit held a single item, a small piece of clear tape, adhesive side up, holding a photograph of a key card. The photograph showed a white plastic card against a ruled background. The resolution was grainy, as if taken with an older phone camera, but the details were legible: the card number, the building logo, and in the corner, the digit 604. She bagged the tape and photograph and continued her methodical walk through the building. In the second-floor hallway, near the window that overlooked the alley, she found a receipt on the carpet. It was dated 3 weeks prior and came from a hardware store. The purchase list included 6 rolls of packing tape for cartons of bubble wrap, craft paper, a heat sealer, and a shipping scale. The total was $83. The payment method was cash. The timestamp read 3:52 p.m. The detective photographed the receipt and examined the carpet around it. No other debris. No other sign that anyone had lingered in this spot recently. She returned to the lobby and stood at the reception desk. The manager was no longer present. The space was quiet. The hum of the fluorescent panels continued at that just audible frequency. She photographed the access log one more time and noted that the final unauthorized swipe on the vacant card had occurred 5 days ago at 3:34 a.m. Nothing had been stolen in the past 5 days. She collected the key card from the property office and held it up to the light. The plastic was standard issue, but the magnetic stripe showed a slight wear pattern where it had been repeatedly swiped. She photographed it. She photographed the access panel where the swipes had been registered. She took measurements of the lobby dimensions and noted the camera's sight line, even though it was not functioning. In her notebook, she wrote, "Unauthorized access to Unit 604 via deactivated keycard. Access points, side entrance, mailroom, loading dock. Tool marks on mailroom door. Missing items from utility closet. Wedge found on loading dock. Packing materials purchased. Recent activity ceased. No resolution indicated." She closed her notebook and stood in the lobby, listening to the humming panels, observing the empty space. The detective requested a key to Unit 604 from the building manager. The unit had been sealed after the tenant departed, though no formal lockdown procedure appeared in the records. The manager provided a master key without documentation of when it had last been used or by whom. She photographed the key before entering. The door opened onto darkness. She stepped inside and observed the layout. A studio apartment with one window facing the alley, a kitchenette to the left, a bathroom straight ahead. The air held no odor, not the staleness of an unoccupied space, but something closer to neutral, as if recently circulated. She noted this. The window blinds were drawn. She photographed them in their closed position, then opened them partially. Dust covered the sill in a uniform layer except for a rectangular area roughly 2 feet wide where the dust had been disturbed. The pattern showed where something, a container or flat object, had rested and been removed. Residual dust adhered to the invisible item's outline. The kitchenette contained no appliances beyond what came standard: a stovetop, an empty refrigerator with the door left open. The cabinets held nothing. She opened each one systematically. Empty. The drawers were empty as well. But the sink held a single item, a hair caught in the drain screen, roughly 3 inches long, dark brown or black in color. She photographed it in place, then collected it in a small envelope. The bathroom was equally vacant. She checked the medicine cabinet, which hung open and contained only a paper label indicating it had been inspected by maintenance on a date 6 months prior. The toilet tank lid was present. She lifted it and observed the interior: dry, clean, no residue. The shower stall bore no soap residue or shampoo bottles. The grout between tiles showed no discoloration indicating recent water use. The main room contained no furniture. The carpet showed vacuum marks and parallel lines, evidence of recent cleaning. But near the corner where the bedroom area would have been, she observed a different pattern, a rectangular depression in the carpet where a bed or large piece of furniture had rested for an extended period. The fibers in this depression had not recovered their original height. She photographed it from multiple angles and noted its dimensions in her notebook, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet. She crouched near the depression and examined the carpet fibers closely. They appeared undisturbed by visible debris. She used a small flashlight and angled it across the surface. Under the oblique light, she observed something. A faint residue on several fibers, a thin coating that caught the light differently than the surrounding carpet. She did not touch it. She photographed it and marked the location with a small flag for later collection. Against the far wall, partially hidden by the apartment's interior angle, she discovered a single item, a cardboard box, flattened and folded to fit into the corner space. It was unmarked. She photographed it in place, then carefully unfolded it to examine its construction. The interior bore printed text. A shipping label had been affixed here, then removed. The adhesive residue remained, but the label itself was gone. She could see partial impressions where the label's edges had left faint marks in the box's surface. She photographed these impressions with the flashlight angled low to highlight the relief. The box's dimensions matched the standard size for high-value electronics. No manufacturer markings remained, but the internal packaging material, craft paper, and bubble wrap had left impressions as well. She collected a sample of the craft paper that had adhered to the cardboard's interior and sealed it in an evidence bag. Behind the flattened box, wedged into the corner, she found something else, a charging cable, still coiled. The connector was proprietary, not a standard USB design. The cable itself showed no visible wear, and the connector pins bore no oxidation. She photographed it and bagged it separately. The detective returned to the window and observed the alley below. The loading dock was visible from this vantage point, a direct line of sight with no obstruction. She photographed the view and noted that someone standing in this unit could observe all activity on the dock. She timed the observation. Delivery trucks arrived at irregular intervals throughout the day, but the parking pattern showed vehicles stayed an average of 4 to 8 minutes. The alley itself was quiet, with minimal foot traffic. She examined the window more closely. The lock mechanism appeared functional. She tested it. It moved smoothly, suggesting recent use. The window frame showed no damage or signs of forced entry, but the rubber weather stripping at the sill bore a faint mark, a thin line where the frame had rubbed, recently enough that the mark was still visible. She photographed this. On the inside of the window, near the sill, someone had scratched a notation into the paint. It was small, barely legible, a date. She leaned close and observed it. The date corresponded to 3 weeks prior, the same date as the hardware store receipt she had found in the hallway. The bathtub held nothing visible, but when she ran her hand across the surface, she felt a residue, something tacky and adhesive in nature, but not soap. She photographed the tub and swabbed the interior with a cotton applicator, bagging the sample. The residue appeared consistent with latex or silicone, the kind used in protective coatings or gaskets. She returned to the main room and stood still, observing the space in its entirety. The apartment contained almost nothing, yet it bore evidence of recent and repeated use. The carpet showed where patterns suggesting foot traffic from the entrance to the window and back again. The refrigerator door had been left open, a deliberate choice, suggesting someone had stored items there temporarily. The window bore scratches and marks indicating observation of the alley. The corner depression indicated storage of a significant item for an extended period. She photographed the room again, this time with a wide lens to capture the full space. The image showed an empty apartment with the pale rectangles of furniture impressions still visible on the carpet, like the negative space in a photograph, the absence itself becoming the evidence. Before leaving, she examined the door lock from the interior. The mechanism showed no scratches or damage, but around the deadbolt, the paint bore a mark, a small circular indent where the bolt had been struck repeatedly, the kind of mark that accumulated over time from someone testing the lock repeatedly, pushing against it with increasing pressure until it yielded. She photographed this carefully. The hallway outside remained silent. She secured the unit and requested the master key log from the building manager, the record of who had accessed Unit 604 and when. The manager provided a printout showing 4 documented entries: the tenant's move-out date, a maintenance inspection 6 months prior, and 2 entries labeled administrative access with no names attached, only timestamps. One was dated 3 weeks prior at 5:23 p.m. The other was dated 5 days prior at 2:18 a.m. She photographed the log and noted the times in her notebook. The entry at 5:23 p.m. corresponded to the date scratched into the window paint. The entry at 2:18 a.m. corresponded to the final unauthorized card swipe in the lobby access log. The detective stood in the hallway outside Unit 604 and reviewed her findings. The apartment had been used as a storage and observation point. Objects had been moved in and out through the window. The window and door locks bore evidence of repeated testing or forced manipulation. A charging cable of an expensive, proprietary design had been left behind. A hair had been caught in the drain. A date had been scratched into the window paint. She descended the stairs slowly, observing the carpet were patterned once more. The prints leading from the stairwell to Unit 604 continued past the unit toward the far end of the hallway, where the building's emergency stairs provided an alternate exit route. The pattern suggested a person who knew the building's layout and had planned multiple points of entry and exit. The same person who had swiped the deactivated keycard. The same person who had purchased packing materials. The same person who had observed the loading dock from the window of a vacant unit while packages arrived from below. She closed her notebook and walked toward the main stairs, her footsteps the only sound in the empty hallway. The detective requested the building's full tenant registry from the past 18 months. The manager provided a document printed on standard office paper, the entries handwritten in black ink. She photographed each page and began cross-referencing the names against the residents who had reported missing packages. Of the 12 confirmed theft victims, only 3 names appeared in the current registry. The others had moved out within the past year. She obtained forwarding addresses for 9 of them and began calling. Most answered after several rings. One number was disconnected. Another reached a woman who no longer lived at the address provided. The forwarding information was incorrect. The detective visited the building's administrative office on the ground floor, a small room with filing cabinets lining one wall. The manager granted access and left her alone. She opened the cabinet marked Tenant Records and pulled files chronologically. Each file contained a lease agreement, a move-in inspection form, and a deposit receipt. She photographed each document page by page, focusing on signatures and dates. Unit 604's file was thin. The tenant who had occupied it was listed as David Northrup, who had leased the unit for 1 year beginning 14 months prior and departed 8 months ago. His lease had been terminated early. The notation indicated he'd paid a penalty and surrendered the keys on schedule. The move-in inspection form showed a standard checklist of apartment conditions: walls unmarked, appliances functional, carpet clean. The move-out inspection form was missing. She photographed the lease agreement. Northrop's signature appeared in 3 places: on the lease itself, on the deposit receipt, and on an emergency contact form. The handwriting was consistent across all 3 documents. She noted the address he'd provided, an apartment in a neighboring city, the same one that had appeared in the tenant registry as his forwarding address. She pulled files for the other residents who had reported missing items. One woman, Patricia Ashton from Unit 312, had moved out 5 months prior. Her file contained a lease agreement dated 2 years prior with a renewal notation dated 1 year ago. But the move-out inspection form was also missing. The detective photographed what remained: the lease showing Ashton's signature, a forwarding address in another state, and a deposit receipt indicating her full security deposit had been returned. She continued through the filing cabinet. Of the 12 residents who had reported thefts, 4 files were incomplete, missing move-out inspection forms or containing incorrect forwarding addresses. 2 of these 4 had moved out within the past 3 months. 1 had moved out 6 months prior. The detective photographed the empty file folders where move-out forms should have been. She examined the cabinet itself. The folders were arranged chronologically, and gaps appeared in the sequence where documents had been removed. The remaining folders showed dust patterns indicating they had not been disturbed for months. The missing folders showed cleaner edges where they had been pulled from their positions more recently. She requested the hard copy move-out inspection forms that were kept separately. The manager checked a secondary filing system and located them in a cardboard box under a desk. The detective photographed the box's contents. Inspection forms for the past 18 months were present, but several sheets appeared to have been removed. The remaining forms showed a consistent pattern. The date sequence jumped. Forms dated 6 months ago were followed directly by forms dated 5 months ago, with no forms in between. Similar gaps appeared at other points in the sequence. The detective counted the gaps. 17 inspection forms were missing from the sequence, far more than the 4 incomplete tenant files suggested. She photographed the gaps and noted the date ranges on missing forms. Most gaps corresponded to move-outs that had occurred during evening or weekend hours, according to timestamps noted on adjacent forms. She requested the security footage from the front entrance camera for the dates corresponding to the missing move-out inspections. The manager explained again that the system had failed 3 weeks prior. She asked when the system had last been operational before that failure. The manager checked the maintenance log and indicated the system had been functioning continuously for the past 2 years with no prior outages. She requested the log entries for service calls to the security camera system. The maintenance log showed a single entry, a technician visit scheduled for 2 weeks prior, but the visit had been canceled by the building's property management company. The cancellation notation simply read, "Not necessary at this time." There was no signature, no explanation, no follow-up date scheduled. The detective photographed the maintenance log and the cancellation entry. She requested the name of the property management company and the technician who had been scheduled. The manager provided both. She also requested the contact information for the previous building manager, noting that the current manager had been hired 6 months prior, the same time frame during which the move-out inspection forms began disappearing. The previous manager's name was Robert Kellerman. His contact information was listed in the building's files. The detective called the number. A voicemail recording indicated the line was no longer in service. She returned to Unit 604's file and examined it under better lighting. The lease agreement bore Northrop's signature, but she observed something. The pressure of the pen had varied across the signature. The first letter was pressed deeply into the paper, creating a visible indent. The remaining letters showed progressively lighter pressure. She photographed this with a flashlight angled to highlight the depth variation. The emergency contact form listed a phone number and an address. The address was the same apartment in the neighboring city. The phone number was different from the one that appeared on the lease agreement. She photographed both. She requested the building's phone records from the past year, specifically any calls made to or from building management numbers. The manager indicated that call records were maintained by the property management company, not the building itself. She requested the property management company's contact information and called their main office. A receptionist answered. The detective identified herself and requested information about the building's service calls and maintenance scheduling. The receptionist transferred her to a supervisor. After several minutes on hold, a man named Gregory Holt returned the call. He explained that the property management company handled maintenance for 47 buildings in the metro area. He would need to pull the specific file for the detective's building. She provided the address and waited. Holt's voice returned to the line. He indicated that the building had routine maintenance scheduled quarterly, and emergency calls were logged separately. He could email a complete maintenance history if she provided a fax number or email address. She provided both and ended the call. 20 minutes later, her email chimed. A file titled building_maintenance_log_full_history had arrived. She opened it and observed a spreadsheet with columns for date, time, service type, technician assigned, and completion status. She scrolled through the entries chronologically, photographing sections as she went. The entries aligned with what the building manager had described: quarterly maintenance, routine inspections, occasional repair calls. But a pattern emerged in the completion status column. Entries from 6 months ago forward showed one of two notations: completed or rescheduled. The rescheduled entries numbered 7 in total. Each rescheduled entry had been scheduled for an evening or weekend time slot. Each had been canceled and never rescheduled. She identified the names of the technicians who had been assigned to the canceled service calls. 5 different names appeared across the 7 entries. She screenshotted the names and called Gregory Holt again. She asked about the canceled service calls. Holt indicated that cancellations were typically initiated by the building manager or property contact. He checked the notes section of his system and found a single notation dated 6 months prior, indicating that the building had requested to suspend non-emergency maintenance for an unspecified period. The request had come from the building manager at the time, Robert Kellerman. The detective requested Kellerman's employment file. Holt explained that personnel records were confidential, but he could indicate that Kellerman had worked for the property management company for 3 years before being terminated 6 months prior. The reason for termination was listed as restructuring. She asked if the company had conducted an exit interview or investigation related to Kellerman's departure. Holt indicated that he had no information about such proceedings. She requested the names and contact information for any supervisors or colleagues who had worked with Kellerman directly. Holt provided 2 names: Margaret Stiles, a senior property manager, and James Rothstein, a maintenance coordinator. The detective asked if either of them had been assigned to the building during Kellerman's tenure. Holt checked the records. Rothstein had been the primary maintenance contact for the building during that period. Stiles had been Kellerman's direct supervisor. The detective called Rothstein first. After explaining her investigation, she asked about Kellerman's management of the building and any irregularities she should be aware of. Rothstein was hesitant initially, then explained that Kellerman had been difficult to work with. He frequently canceled service calls without explanation and had requested that certain maintenance records be kept separate from the standard system. Rothstein had reported this to management, which had prompted an internal review. The review had concluded that Kellerman's employment should be terminated, though Rothstein was not privy to the specific findings. The detective asked if Rothstein recalled which service calls had been canceled. Rothstein indicated that there had been several, mostly related to the security camera system and access control logs. When Rothstein had questioned the cancellations, Kellerman had indicated that budget constraints required reducing non-essential maintenance. Rothstein had accepted this explanation at the time, though he now suspected it had been untrue. She asked Rothstein if he had noticed any irregularities in the building's tenant population or move-out procedures during that period. Rothstein said he had not personally conducted move-out inspections, but he'd noticed that Kellerman had handled them directly rather than delegating to the building's maintenance staff. This had been unusual, as move-out inspections were typically a standard procedure handled by whichever staff member was available. The detective ended the call and immediately called Margaret Stiles. Stiles was more forthcoming. She explained that Kellerman's termination had resulted from a financial audit conducted by the property management company's internal control department. The audit had identified discrepancies in the building's expense reports and maintenance scheduling that suggested possible embezzlement or fraud. However, the company had decided not to pursue criminal charges and had instead terminated Kellerman's employment with a severance agreement that required his silence about the findings. She asked if the audit had identified specific amounts or patterns of fraud. Stiles indicated that she was not at liberty to discuss details beyond what she had already shared due to the confidentiality agreement. However, she noted that the audit had focused on a 3-month period during which unusual maintenance cancellations had occurred simultaneously with tenant move-outs that had not been properly documented. The detective asked if the building's security system had been reviewed as part of the audit. Stiles said it had been. The audit had discovered that access logs for a 2-week period had been deleted from the security system's database. The deletion could not have occurred accidentally. It had required manual intervention and system access credentials. The company had been unable to recover the deleted data. She asked when the security system had failed that eventually prompted the camera replacement. Stiles paused, then indicated that the system failure had not been accidental. During a follow-up investigation, technicians had determined that the camera unit had been deliberately disabled. Its power supply had been disconnected and the cables severed. The failure had occurred on a date that corresponded with one of the missing move-out inspections. The detective noted all of this in her notebook. She asked Stiles if Kellerman's employment file indicated any connection to the building's current manager or to any of the residents. Stiles indicated that Kellerman had listed an emergency contact, a brother named Thomas Kellerman, who worked in logistics and warehouse operations. Thomas Kellerman's address was listed as the same neighboring city where David Northrup had provided as his forwarding address on his lease. The detective ended the call and opened her notebook. She reviewed the sequence of facts. A building manager who had deliberately disabled the security system, canceled maintenance calls, and removed inspection records. A tenant who had occupied Unit 604 during the period when access controls were compromised. A charging cable left behind in the vacant unit. A cable consistent with high-value electronics that had been stolen from the building. A brother of the building manager who worked in logistics, living at the same address as the tenant. She photographed the pages of her notebook and requested a copy of Thomas Kellerman's driver's license from the Department of Motor Vehicles, providing his name, date of birth, and address. The records department indicated they would need a formal request and several days for processing. She submitted the request electronically and noted the submission date and time. She returned to the building and walked through the lobby once more. The access panel where the unauthorized card swipes had been registered still showed the data on its display. She photographed it again, then examined the area around the panel. The wall showed faint scuff marks where something, possibly a ladder, had been positioned to reach the panel. She photographed these marks. She descended to the utility closet and examined the lower shelf again. She used a small brush to collect dust samples from the area where items had been removed. The samples showed a uniform particle composition with one exception, a small metal shaving, roughly 2 millimeters long, embedded in the dust. She collected it in a small envelope and photographed the location where it had been found. The mailroom showed the same tool marks on the door that she had documented previously. But now she observed something additional, a small smear of lubricant on the door frame where a tool had been inserted and worked. She collected a sample of the lubricant using a swab and sealed it in an evidence bag. At the loading dock, she examined the magnetic lock again. The wiring remained exposed where the conduit had been stripped, but she noticed now that the wiring showed signs of having been recently manipulated. The insulation on one wire bore a fresh cut, and the copper conductor beneath showed oxidation that had not yet dulled the bright metal. She photographed this and collected photographic evidence of the cut location. The detective stood in the loading dock and reviewed the full layout. The access path was now clear. Someone with access to building systems and knowledge of maintenance schedules had disabled the security camera, removed inspection records, and allowed an accomplice to observe and intercept packages from the window of a vacant unit. The accomplice had used a compromised access card to move through the building during night hours. The items had been removed through the loading dock using the magnetic lock's vulnerability. Packing materials had been purchased and used to prepare items for resale. She photographed the loading dock one final time, capturing the view toward the alley and the window of Unit 604 above it. The line of sight was clear. The timing was established. The evidence was accumulating. She called the property management company again and requested an emergency meeting with Gregory Holt and the internal control department regarding the security of the building's access systems and the possibility of ongoing criminal activity. Holt scheduled a meeting for the following morning at 9 o'clock. The detective left the building as evening approached. The lobby lights had begun to dim automatically as daylight faded. The fluorescent panels hummed their constant frequency. The space remained empty except for her footsteps, which echoed slightly in the enclosed area. She drove to the neighboring city and located the address where both David Northrup and Thomas Kellerman had listed their residences. It was an apartment complex similar in layout to the building she had been investigating. She photographed the exterior and noted the security measures in place, or rather, their absence. No visible camera system, no access control on the main entrance. A side door held open by a wedge identical to the one she had found on the loading dock. She did not enter. Instead, she returned to her vehicle and called for a patrol unit to conduct surveillance of the location overnight. She provided the address and the names of the individuals she believed would be present there. She also requested that officers photograph any vehicles in the parking lot and run their registrations. The response came back within 20 minutes. 2 vehicles registered to the address. One belonged to Robert Kellerman. The other was registered to a leasing company that specialized in commercial logistics. The name of the logistics company matched the employer listed on Thomas Kellerman's last known employment records. The detective photographed the patrol unit's report and added it to her file. She sat in her vehicle in the parking lot of the apartment complex and waited. No one entered or left the building. The hours passed. At 2:34 a.m., a delivery truck arrived at the rear of the complex. It remained for 18 minutes, then departed. The detective photographed the truck's license plate. She ran the registration and discovered the truck belonged to a delivery service that operated throughout the metro area. The truck's GPS tracking, available through a warrant the detective had obtained the previous day, showed that it had made 18 stops in the past week at secondary market retailers and resale shops. The stops corresponded geographically with locations where high-value electronics were typically offloaded. The detective noted all of this and prepared a supplemental report. She documented the connection between Robert Kellerman, his brother Thomas, and David Northrup. She documented the timeline of the disabled security system, the missing inspection records, and the stolen packages. She documented the charging cable found in Unit 604 and the hair found in the bathroom sink. She documented the tool marks, the lubricant sample, the electrical damage to the magnetic lock, and the metal shaving in the utility closet. She did not yet have a confession. She did not yet have fingerprints matching the suspects to the crime scenes. She did not yet have the video footage that would have recorded the thefts in real time. But the physical evidence formed a pattern, and the pattern indicated a carefully orchestrated operation that had exploited a single point of vulnerability, a building manager who had been willing to compromise the security systems entrusted to his care. She closed her file and waited for morning to arrive. The morning meeting at the property management office occurred in a conference room on the 4th floor of a downtown building. Gregory Holt sat across from the detective, along with two individuals from the internal control department, a woman named Linda Franks and a man named David Underwood. Franks opened a folder and slid across a document marked Confidential Audit Summary. The detective photographed the summary. It documented the 3-month period during which Robert Kellerman had served as building manager. The audit had identified 15 tenant move-outs during that period, but only 7 had corresponding completed move-out inspection forms. The 8 missing inspections had occurred on dates when no other staff members had been present in the building, all evening or weekend hours. The audit had calculated that the building's income during that period showed a discrepancy of approximately $18,000 when compared to the expected lease payment totals. Underwood explained that the discrepancy did not represent missing rent payments. All tenants had paid their leases in full. Instead, the discrepancy appeared in the security deposit accounting. The audit had identified that 8 security deposits, totaling the missing $18,000, had been processed as refunded to departing tenants, but had never actually been transferred to the tenants' bank accounts or addressed in any follow-up correspondence. The detective asked if the property management company had attempted to contact the tenants to inquire about the missing deposits. Franks indicated that 4 of the 8 tenants could not be located using the forwarding addresses on file. The other 4 had been contacted and reported that they had never received their deposits. 2 of those 4 had initiated disputes with their credit card companies and received partial refunds. The other 2 had simply written off the loss. She requested the names of all 15 tenants who had moved out during the audit period. Holt provided a printed list. The detective photographed it and cross-referenced it against her notes. David Northrup's name appeared, with a move-out date of 8 months prior and a notation that his move-out inspection had been completed. But when she compared the notation to the audit findings, she found that Northrop's inspection was not among the 7 completed forms on file. His inspection belonged to the 8 missing records. She asked if the deposit amount associated with Northrop's lease was among the 8 unaccounted for deposits. Holt checked the account ledger and confirmed it was. Northrop's deposit of $2,500 had been processed as refunded but never delivered. The detective requested copies of all correspondence related to Northrop's tenancy, his lease agreement, move-in inspection, deposit payment receipt, and any communications with the property management office. Holt indicated that he would need to retrieve these from the filing system. He left the conference room and returned 10 minutes later with a folder containing photocopied documents. The detective photographed each page. The lease agreement was identical to the copy she had obtained from the building. The move-in inspection form showed the standard checklist, but the deposit payment receipt bore an unusual notation. The deposit had been paid in cash, not by check or credit card. The receipt was handwritten, and the amount was noted in Kellerman's handwriting. She compared it to samples she had collected during the building investigation. She asked if cash deposits were standard procedure. Franks indicated that they were not. Nearly all deposits were paid by check or credit card to create an audit trail. A cash deposit required special authorization. She requested the authorization form. Holt searched the folder but found nothing. He indicated that no authorization form appeared in Northrop's file. The detective asked if there were any communications between Northrop and Kellerman regarding the deposit. Holt provided an email printout. The message, dated 1 week before Northrop's move-in, was from Kellerman to Northrop's email address. It read, "Cash deposit preferred for expedited processing. Contact me directly for arrangements." The email had been sent from Kellerman's personal account, not his property management company email. The detective photographed it and requested that the property management company provide her with access to Kellerman's company email account during the period of his employment. Holt indicated that company policy would require approval from the legal department, but he would make the request. She asked about the delivery truck that had been observed at the apartment complex where Kellerman and Northrop resided. Underwood indicated that the property management company had no prior knowledge of that location and had not conducted any investigation into Kellerman's residence or activities outside of his work at the building. He suggested that the detective provide a formal information request to law enforcement's financial crimes unit, which might have broader authority to investigate Kellerman's banking and employment records. The meeting concluded with an agreement that the property management company would provide complete documentation of all transactions related to the building during Kellerman's tenure. The detective left the office with additional copies of audit findings and a commitment that the company would cooperate fully with the investigation. She drove to the financial crimes unit and met with a detective named Patricia Hodgson. Hodgson had worked in financial investigations for 12 years and had experience with employee theft cases involving property management. The detective explained the facts of the case: the missing deposits, the disabled security system, the stolen packages, and the suspected connection to the logistics company. Hodgson listened and then opened her computer. She explained that the Financial Crimes Unit maintained records of suspicious activity reports filed by banks and financial institutions. She searched for Robert Kellerman's name and found 4 reports filed in the past year. The reports indicated unusual cash deposits to Kellerman's personal bank account, deposits ranging from $500 to $3,000, occurring every 2 to 3 weeks. The total deposits over 12 months amounted to approximately $38,000. The detective asked if the timing of the cash deposits corresponded to the dates of the stolen packages from the building. Hodgson pulled up the package theft list from the investigation file. She compared the dates and observed that the deposits occurred within 1 to 2 weeks of the package thefts. The correlation was not perfect, but the pattern suggested a possible connection. She requested access to Kellerman's bank statements. Hodgson indicated that she would need a warrant to obtain them, but she could file a request through the prosecutor's office for expedited processing given the ongoing investigation. She explained that the warrant would likely be granted based on the evidence already gathered, the audit findings, the missing deposits, and the suspicious cash deposits to his personal account. While awaiting the warrant, the detective turned her attention to Thomas Kellerman. She requested his employment records from the logistics company that owned the delivery truck. The company's human resources department provided documentation showing that Thomas Kellerman had worked as a warehouse supervisor for the past 2 years. He had access to shipping manifests, tracking systems, and warehouse inventory. The detective contacted the logistics company's internal security department and explained the investigation. The security director, a man named Leonard Price, agreed to cooperate and provided information about the company's shipping patterns. He explained that the company handled thousands of packages daily for various retailers and e-commerce platforms. Most packages were standard shipments, but approximately 1% of packages never reached their destinations. They were reported as lost or misdelivered. The detective asked if the loss rate had been unusual in the past year. Price checked the company's loss statistics and indicated that losses had been elevated compared to historical averages. In the 6 months prior to the current date, the loss rate had increased to approximately 3%. However, the losses had been dismissed as normal operational attrition and had not been investigated further. She requested a list of packages reported as lost during the 6-month period from the specific warehouse where Thomas Kellerman worked. Price provided the data in electronic format. The detective reviewed the list and cross-referenced it against the packages reported as stolen from the building. 14 items appeared on both lists. Packages reported as lost from the logistics company that matched the descriptions of items stolen from the building. She photographed the comparison data and requested that the logistics company file a report with their insurer regarding the pattern of losses from that specific warehouse. Price agreed and indicated that he would initiate an investigation into Thomas Kellerman's access to the warehouse system during the dates corresponding to the missing packages. The detective returned to the property management office with a copy of the warrant obtained from the prosecutor's office. The warrant authorized access to Robert Kellerman's personal bank statements for the past 18 months. Holt provided the documentation to a financial analyst within the company, who compiled the requested records and printed them for review. The detective spread the bank statements across a table in the conference room and began reviewing them chronologically. Kellerman's account showed regular deposits corresponding to his salary from the property management company, appearing on the 1st and 15th of each month. But beginning 6 months prior, additional deposits began appearing, cash deposits ranging from $500 to $3,000, with no consistent pattern or source indicated. She photographed each statement and marked the dates of the cash deposits. She then created a timeline comparing the cash deposits to the dates of the missing packages, the stolen items from the building, and the suspicious activity reports filed by the bank. The pattern was clear. A package would be stolen from the building on a given date. Within 1 to 2 weeks, a cash deposit would appear in Kellerman's bank account. The deposit amount varied, but the timing remained consistent. Over the 6-month period, Kellerman had deposited approximately $38,000 in cash. When divided by the approximate number of thefts, the per item profit averaged approximately $2,000 to $3,000 per stolen package. The detective asked to review Kellerman's account statements in more detail. She observed that the cash deposits had ceased abruptly 5 weeks prior, the same time frame during which the security camera had been deliberately disabled and the access logs had been deleted. No cash deposits had been recorded since that date. She also observed something else. 5 days before the final cash deposit, a wire transfer of $12,000 had been sent from Kellerman's account to a business account registered to the logistics company's warehouse facility. The transfer was labeled Consulting Services. A subsequent wire transfer of $8,000 had been sent to the same account 1 week later, with the same label. The detective photographed these transactions and requested that the property management company and the logistics company cooperate in identifying the source and purpose of these wire transfers. She also requested that the logistics company provide documentation of any payments made to external consultants or service providers during that period. The logistics company's accounting department found no corresponding invoices or contracts related to the consulting services payments. The wire transfers appeared to be unexplained transactions with no legitimate business purpose documented. The detective requested that the company's internal audit department investigate the recipients of the wire transfers and determine if they had been diverted to personal accounts or external entities. She returned to the apartment complex where Kellerman and Northrop had been observed and conducted a more thorough physical search of the building's exterior. The rear entrance showed fresh tool marks similar to those found in the building under investigation, marks consistent with a crowbar or pry tool being inserted between the door frame and the wall. She photographed the marks and collected paint samples from the damaged area. The loading dock area behind the apartment complex contained a series of storage units. She requested access from the building management and was directed to a storage office. The office records indicated that 3 units had been rented to Thomas Kellerman over the past 8 months. The units were numbered 47, 52, and 88. She requested access to all 3. Unit 47 contained furniture, a bed frame, chairs, and a dresser that appeared to be personal items. Unit 52 was empty except for a single cardboard box, which the detective opened carefully. The box contained packing materials, bubble wrap, craft paper, and foam inserts, but no other contents. Unit 88 was secured with a padlock. The detective obtained a warrant to open it and returned with bolt cutters. The lock was severed and the door opened. Inside, she observed rows of shelving containing approximately 40 sealed cardboard boxes. The boxes bore various markings indicating different retailers and manufacturers. She photographed the interior space and the arrangement of boxes. She selected 3 boxes at random and opened them carefully. The first contained a wireless speaker system still in its original packaging, retail value approximately $400. The second contained a digital camera lens, value approximately $900. The third contained a smart television remote control packaging containing multiple remotes, value approximately $300. The detective photographed each box and its contents. She cross-referenced the retail markers against the list of stolen items from the building. All 3 boxes matched items that had been reported missing by residents of the building under investigation. She requested that law enforcement secure the storage unit and obtain a complete inventory of its contents. She also requested that the contents be photographed and cataloged as evidence. The total estimated value of the items in the storage unit was calculated at approximately $30,000, a figure that corresponded closely to the amount of cash deposits Kellerman had received over the past 6 months. The detective conducted a final walkthrough of Unit 88, observing every detail. The boxes were arranged with precision. They were organized by size and type, suggesting a deliberate inventory system. She photographed the organization pattern and noted that several boxes appeared newer than others, suggesting that the operation was ongoing at the time of the storage unit's discovery. She also observed something on the floor, a small receipt fragment, partially torn. She photographed it and collected it carefully. The receipt showed the name of an electronics resale store and a transaction date from 3 weeks prior. The transaction was listed as a bulk purchase of 15 items. The quantity and pricing aligned with what would be expected if the stolen items had been offered for resale in bulk. The detective stood in the storage unit and reviewed the accumulated evidence. The case against Robert Kellerman and Thomas Kellerman was building in layers. The disabled security systems, the missing inspection records, the unaccounted for deposits, the cash deposits to Kellerman's personal account, the wire transfers to the logistics company, the suspicious losses from the warehouse, the stolen items found in storage, and the resale receipt indicating the items had been sold to a secondary market vendor. She photographed the storage unit one final time and stepped outside. The afternoon sun illuminated the row of units, their doors sealed and uniform except for Unit 88, which now stood open with its contents partially visible. She closed the door and sealed the unit with evidence tape. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation, one man with access to building systems and another with access to warehouse inventory had conspired to intercept high-value packages intended for residents. They had stored the items, sold them to resale vendors, and attempted to conceal the operation by disabling security systems and destroying records. But the physical evidence remained. The tools marks, the deposits, the wire transfers, the stored inventory, the resale receipts. All of it formed a chain of evidence that documented the crime systematically and without ambiguity. The detective returned to her vehicle and called for a warrant to arrest both Kellerman brothers. As she waited for the response, she reviewed her notes one final time, documenting each piece of evidence in chronological order, ensuring that the chain of custody was clear and unbroken. The investigation continued, but the fundamental facts had been established. The crime was not yet solved, but the physical reality of it, the concrete, visible, measurable evidence, had been documented with precision. That documentation would form the foundation of everything that followed. The detective sat alone in the evidence room, a space with gray walls and metal shelving that held the accumulated documentation of 6 weeks' investigation. The fluorescent panels overhead cast their familiar hum. She had requested a quiet space to review the complete file before filing her final report, and the property management office had granted access after hours. She spread the documents across a large table in chronological order. The lease agreements, the audit findings, the bank statements, the warehouse loss reports, the storage unit inventory, the receipts, all of it laid out so she could observe the patterns she had assembled piece by piece. But something remained unresolved. The wire transfers to the logistics company, the $12,000 and the $8,000 labeled consulting services, did not align with the other financial transactions. The logistics company's accounting department had found no corresponding invoices or contracts. The transfers appeared to be payments with no legitimate purpose, yet they had been sent deliberately from Kellerman's account to a business account registered to the warehouse facility. She pulled the logistics company's account documentation and reviewed it again. The receiving account was indeed registered to the facility, but the account holder was not the logistics company itself. It was registered under a single proprietor name, Thomas Kellerman, proprietor. The detective paused. Thomas Kellerman had an account in his own name at the warehouse facility where he worked. She requested the logistics company's internal files to determine if this was standard practice. The company's accounting department confirmed that it was not. Supervisory employees typically did not maintain separate accounts with the facility. The account was unusual and had not been approved through normal channels. She researched the account creation date and discovered it had been opened 6 months prior, precisely when Robert Kellerman had begun his tenure at the building. The account had received exactly 3 deposits. The 2 wire transfers from Robert Kellerman's account, totaling $20,000, and a third deposit of $15,000 from a secondary business account registered to a resale electronics retailer. The connection crystallized. The $20,000 sent from Robert Kellerman's account was not payment for consulting services. It was capital investment. Thomas Kellerman had established an account specifically to receive funds for a business venture. The $15,000 deposit from the resale retailer suggested the retailer was a partner in the operation or a client receiving a share of the profits from the stolen merchandise. The detective pulled the resale receipt she had found in Storage Unit 88 and examined it again. The store name was Premier Electronics Resale. She searched the business registry for this entity and found it was registered to an address in the same city where both Kellerman brothers maintained residences. She called the business registry office and requested the owner of record. The registry indicated that Premier Electronics Resale was registered under a business license held by a woman named Catherine Yates. The detective requested Yates's business filing documents and received them by email within 30 minutes. Yates's business license application included an address and a phone number. The detective called the number and reached a voicemail message indicating the business was closed temporarily. She noted the address and drove to the location. Premier Electronics Resale occupied a small storefront in a strip mall. The windows were papered over with brown craft paper, obscuring the interior. A sign on the door indicated closed for inventory, opening soon. The detective photographed the storefront and attempted to look through a small gap in the craft paper. She could see shelving and boxes arranged inside, but no people or activity. She returned to the property management office and requested more detailed information about the wire transfers. She asked if the property management company's systems recorded the authorization for those transfers, specifically, who had approved them and when. Gregory Holt pulled the company's financial authorization records. The wire transfers showed approval from Kellerman's account, but the authorization signature did not match Kellerman's known signature. The detective photographed the authorization form and compared it side by side with samples of Kellerman's handwriting she had collected from other documents. The authorization signature was inconsistent with Kellerman's known handwriting. The letters were more uniform, the pressure more even, suggesting the signature had been forged or provided by a different individual. The detective requested that a professional handwriting analyst review the authorization form. The analyst reported back within 24 hours. The conclusion was definitive. The signature on the authorization form did not match Robert Kellerman's known handwriting. The signature was consistent with a female hand, based on the letter forms and pressure patterns. The detective returned to Catherine Yates's business filing documents and examined her signature on the business license application. She compared it with the authorization signature on the wire transfer form. The letter forms matched. The pressure patterns aligned. The signatures were made by the same hand. Catherine Yates had forged Robert Kellerman's signature on the wire transfer authorization forms. She had diverted $20,000 from Kellerman's account to her business account without his knowledge or consent. She had received $15,000 from the resale of the stolen electronics and deposited it into the same account. She was operating a secondary resale business that appeared to be the distribution point for the stolen merchandise. But this raised a new question. Why would Catherine Yates forge Kellerman's signature to move money into her own account? If she was receiving payment for reselling the merchandise, a straightforward transaction would have sufficed. The forged authorization suggested deception. Either Kellerman did not know about the $20,000 being transferred, or Yates was attempting to obscure the source of the funds. The detective searched business records for any connection between Catherine Yates and Robert Kellerman. She found nothing, no shared addresses, no corporate registrations, no employment records linking them. She searched for a connection between Yates and Thomas Kellerman. Again, nothing appeared. But then she conducted a search of property records and discovered something. Catherine Yates and Robert Kellerman had purchased a property together 7 years prior. The property was registered as a joint tenancy with equal shares. The deed showed both names as owners. The property was residential, a house in a neighboring jurisdiction. The detective requested the property assessment records and tax history. The property taxes had been paid consistently for 6 years, but in the past year, a significant change had occurred. The property had been transferred to foreclosure proceedings. The bank holding the mortgage had initiated foreclosure when payments fell into arrears. The foreclosure notice indicated that the property had an outstanding mortgage balance of approximately $240,000. The missed payments totaled approximately $15,000. The foreclosure sale was scheduled for 30 days from the current date. The detective now understood the motive. Robert Kellerman and Catherine Yates owned property together. The property was underwater. The mortgage exceeded its current market value. Kellerman faced losing his share of the property and potentially owing deficiency payments to the bank if the foreclosure sale did not cover the full balance. Yates faced a similar situation. Thomas Kellerman, Kellerman's brother, had access to warehouse inventory. Together, they had orchestrated the theft of high-value packages intended for building residents. The stolen merchandise was funneled through Premier Electronics Resale, which Yates operated. The proceeds from the resales were being diverted into Yates's business account, ostensibly to generate funds for the mortgage payments. But Yates had not been satisfied with her share of the proceeds. She had forged Kellerman's signature to transfer an additional $20,000 from his personal account to her business account, funds that should have gone toward his own debts. This suggested either desperation or deliberate fraud by Yates to maximize her own benefit at Kellerman's expense. The detective pulled the property deed again and examined it more carefully. The document had been created 7 years prior. She noted the date. It was signed by both Kellerman and Yates as equal partners in the property purchase. She then reviewed Kellerman's employment history at the property management company, which he had joined 4 years prior. She calculated the timeline. Kellerman and Yates had purchased the property together 7 years ago. 4 years ago, Kellerman began his employment at the property management company. 3 months ago, he began disabling security systems and enabling package thefts. 6 months ago, he had requested that his brother work with him on the scheme. 1 month ago, he had authorized wire transfers to Yates's business account to address the looming foreclosure. But Yates had then forged additional authorization forms to transfer additional funds without his knowledge, suggesting that her desperate financial situation had motivated her to steal from her partner in the property venture. The detective pulled Yates's personal financial records, obtained through a warrant from the prosecutor's office. The records showed that Yates had personal debts extending far beyond the property mortgage. She maintained credit card balances totaling approximately $60,000. She had medical debt from emergency room visits not covered by insurance. She had unpaid utility bills and rent payments on a separate residence, suggesting she no longer lived in the jointly owned property. The pieces aligned completely now. 7 years prior, Kellerman and Yates had entered into a property partnership, likely motivated by romantic or familial connection. The investment had soured. The property became a liability. Both partners were drowning in debt. For years ago, Kellerman had found employment in property management, a position that offered access to building systems and resident information. 3 months ago, faced with the imminent foreclosure, he had activated a plan that had been developing in his mind, possibly for years, to generate revenue through systematic theft of packages destined for his building's residents. He had recruited his brother Thomas, who worked in logistics and had access to warehouse inventory. Together, they had begun intercepting packages. The proceeds had been routed through Catherine Yates's resale business. Kellerman had authorized wire transfers to her account, expecting her to manage the resale operation and help cover the mortgage obligations. But Yates, facing her own mounting debts and the approaching foreclosure deadline, had decided to maximize her take. She had forged additional authorization forms to divert money intended for Kellerman into her account, creating a secondary theft within the theft itself. The investigation now revealed not one crime, but multiple overlapping crimes. The theft of packages by Kellerman and Thomas, the unlawful diversion of security deposits by Kellerman, the money laundering through Yates's resale business, and finally, the forgery and fraud perpetrated by Yates against Kellerman. The detective photographed the property deed and the foreclosure notice side by side. She photographed the compared signatures, Yates's authentic signature on the business license and the forged signature on the wire transfer authorization. She reviewed the timeline one final time. The precise intersection of Kellerman's employment beginning, his access to building systems increasing, the first package thefts occurring, the security camera being disabled, the access logs being deleted, the wire transfers being authorized, Yates forging additional authorizations, and the foreclosure notice arriving. Each event had a logical cause and a logical consequence. The motive was not abstract or psychological. It was concrete and measurable, rooted in the simple and brutal fact that two people facing financial ruin had attempted to generate income through theft and fraud. When their partnership began to fracture under the stress of conflicting interests, that fraud had extended to include theft from each other. The detective closed her notebook and prepared her final report. She documented every connection, every piece of evidence, every logical step from the initial theft report to the identification of the perpetrators and their motives. She included photographs of the signatures, the property documents, the foreclosure notice, and the financial records. She called the prosecutor's office and provided a summary of her findings. She explained that the case was now ready for charges: theft from building residents, unlawful diversion of security deposits, money laundering, forgery, and fraud. She indicated that warrants should be prepared for the arrest of Robert Kellerman, Thomas Kellerman, and Catherine Yates. The prosecutor's office confirmed receipt of the investigation file and indicated that arrest warrants would be prepared within 24 hours. The detective was instructed to remain available for any final questions before the warrants were executed. She sat in the evidence room one final time, observing the physical evidence she had accumulated, the receipts, the bank statements, the property documents, the photographs of tool marks and deposits. None of it was sensational. None of it demanded attention. But together, organized chronologically and logically, it told a complete story of human desperation and fraud. The detective filed her final report with the prosecutor's office at 4:18 p.m. She noted the date and time and closed the case file. The investigation was complete. The perpetrators had been identified. The motive was clear. The evidence was sufficient for prosecution. She drove back through the city as evening light dimmed the buildings and streets. She passed the apartment building where the initial theft had been reported by Melissa Huang, the freelance graphic designer who had ordered a laptop for her home office. She passed the building where Unit 604 stood empty, its window overlooking an alley where packages had been intercepted and stolen. She passed the storage unit facility where the stolen merchandise had been cached. She passed the strip mall where Premier Electronics Resale had operated, its windows still papered over with craft paper, its interior obscured. She drove without stopping, observing the city's orderly streets and the accumulated evidence of ordinary human activity, the people moving through spaces, the vehicles parked in designated areas, the buildings standing upright against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that city, 3 people waited without knowing that warrants had been prepared, that their photographs had been cataloged as suspects, that the logical chain of evidence connecting their actions had been documented and filed. The detective did not feel satisfaction or certainty. She had merely observed, documented, and synthesized the physical evidence that the crime itself had left behind. The rest would follow: the warrants, the arrests, the interrogations, the trial. But the essential work was complete. She filed the case in her mind and turned her attention to the next one, understanding that this was simply how it worked. Crimes left traces, traces accumulated into patterns, and patterns, once observed carefully enough, revealed the truth. Story 3. An auto repair shop owner filed a claim for a break-in, listing $8,000 in stolen tools. When the insurance investigator reviewed the security footage, she found something odd. The thief moved with the casual familiarity of someone who worked there and disappeared through a side exit with a key. It was the shop's own assistant manager, who'd been methodically stealing tools and reselling them online for months. The insurance investigator, Marion Kellogg, arrived at Riverside Auto Repair on a Tuesday morning when the shop was closed. The owner, Derek Paulson, had called her the previous evening, his voice tight with the particular anger of a man who discovers betrayal in his own business. The break-in had occurred sometime between 11 p.m. Monday and 6 a.m. Tuesday. The security footage showed the theft in full detail. She parked outside the bay doors and examined the entrance. No force marks on the locks. No splintered wood around the frame. The deadbolt showed no scratches from tools. She photographed the door hinges, the strike plate, the weathered paint around the handle. Everything intact. Inside, the shop smelled of concrete dust and old hydraulic fluid. Her footsteps echoed through the service bays. 3 lifts sat idle. Diagnostic computers lined the wall, their screens dark. The fluorescent panels overhead cast everything in a flat, institutional glow. The tool storage occupied the rear corner, a wall of pegboard and locked cabinets. Paulson had provided an inventory list. According to his documentation, the missing items totaled 43 tools, socket sets, wrenches, impact drivers, a specialized transmission jack, compression testers, and a diagnostic scanner worth $2,400 alone. The pegboard showed gaps where things had hung. The cabinets were open, their locks broken cleanly from the inside. Kellogg photographed each empty space. Then she began opening drawers. The second drawer in the corner workstation contained receipts. She pulled them out slowly, laying them across the metal surface in chronological order. Most were routine, parts orders, fuel invoices, cleaning supplies. But 3 stood out. They were from an online resale platform, printed and filed rather than digital. The dates corresponded with dates when the assistant manager, a man named Thomas Brennan, had worked evening shifts. The receipts showed successful sales of socket sets, wrenches, and diagnostic equipment. The platform username was toolhouse_resale. She photographed each receipt and placed them in an evidence envelope. The logbook for tool checkout sat on a shelf above the workstation. It was a physical ledger, bound in worn cloth, with columns for date, time, tool name, checkout staff member, and return time. She opened it and scanned backward through the entries. Most tools had been checked out and returned the same day. But starting 5 months ago, an entry appeared nearly weekly. Brennan's initials, tools listed, no return time recorded. The handwriting was consistent, the entries methodical. She photographed 30 pages. In the break room, she found the employee roster and a copy of the alarm code log. The sheet showed door access timestamps for the past month. Brennan's badge had triggered the side exit at 3:28 a.m. on the night of the theft. The same badge had deactivated the alarm at 2:51 a.m. No other employee access was recorded. She returned to the storage area and examined the broken cabinet locks more closely. The mechanism showed damage consistent with being opened from inside with a key. No evidence of prying tools. No marks suggesting force applied from outside. She placed the cabinet under the light and photographed the interior mechanism. Behind the workstation, partially hidden by a rolled-up drop cloth, she found a small wooden box. It contained 19 blank tool tags, the inventory labels used to register equipment. The tags were unused, unstuck from their roll. She held them up to the light. The ink on the backing was fresh. The diagnostic computer nearest the storage area still had a USB drive inserted into its port. She photographed it in place, then carefully removed it with gloved hands. The drive was unmarked. She photographed both sides and secured it in an evidence bag. In Brennan's assigned locker, which Paulson had opened for her, she found work gloves, a spare uniform shirt, and 3 promotional pins from industrial tool vendors. Below the shelf, wrapped in newspaper, was a small logbook, personal, not business. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. It listed tool names, dates, and dollar amounts. The entries accelerated over time. The final entry, from the previous night, recorded 16 items and a total of $4,280. Below that was a single line, last load. Done after this. She photographed every page of the logbook and bagged it separately. The time records stored in the office computer showed Brennan's hours. He had clocked out at 10:47 p.m. on Monday, but remained in the building, according to the alarm logs, until 3:45 a.m. She printed the records and compared them against the security footage timestamps. The footage showed him moving through the service bays at 2:53 a.m., loading tools into a cloth bag. He moved without hesitation, knowing exactly where each item was stored. At 3:28 a.m., he exited through the side door using his key. Kellogg photographed the printed records and the alarm log printout. She spent 2 more hours examining the shop floor, the storage racks, and the administrative space. In the office trash, she found crumpled email drafts, printed and discarded, not digital. They were from Brennan's work email address, sent to the resale platform requesting payment verification for a sale. The timestamp on one printout was dated 5 days prior. The email contained the phrase, "This is the last batch before I transition to other work." She placed all the physical evidence in labeled envelopes and loaded them into her vehicle. The morning light had shifted across the concrete floor. The shop remained silent except for the faint hum of the compressor in the corner, running on a timer. Before leaving, she stood at the workstation and reviewed her notes. The facts accumulated without emotion. The internal lock breaking, the badge access, the logbook entries, the resale receipts, the personal accounting of stolen goods, the email drafts. Each one a discrete object or recorded data point. Each one a line in the same direction. Marion Kellogg returned to Riverside Auto Repair on Wednesday morning with a forensic accountant named Douglas Hartley. The shop was still closed. Paulson had agreed to provide access to all financial records, employee files, and computer systems. The case had shifted from simple theft to something more complex. The personal logbook suggested deliberation, planning, and a timeline that extended beyond the single night of the insurance claim. They set up in the office. Hartley opened the business accounting software on the main desktop computer while Kellogg examined the filing system. The cabinets were organized by year, with folders for payroll, invoices, tax records, and vendor payments. She pulled the personnel file for Thomas Brennan. The file contained his original job application, dated 18 months prior. His listed previous employment was at a tool rental facility 30 miles away. The reference phone number on the application had been filled in by hand. Kellogg noted the name, James Whitmore, manager. She photographed the application. Behind the application was a W-2 form from the previous year. It showed gross income of $31,400. Below that was a recent pay stub from 2 weeks ago. The same stub listed a deduction for health insurance and a tax withholding. His net pay was $1,847 per 2-week period. Hartley called across the room. He had found something in the accounting software. The business account showed regular payments to a vendor called Northeast Tool Supply. The payments appeared every 2 weeks, always on Thursday, always for amounts between $800 and $1,200. Hartley scrolled backward through months of transactions. The payments had started 12 months ago. Before that, the business purchased tools sporadically from various suppliers in amounts of $200 to $400. Why would he suddenly need this much inventory? Hartley asked. Kellogg photographed the transaction list. Then she walked to the parts storage area, a separate section from the tool storage, where the shop kept replacement components and consumables. She opened the inventory log. According to the documentation, the shop maintained approximately $15,000 in active parts at any given time. The log was updated weekly by whichever staff member performed the inventory check. She traced the signatures backward. Most entries were signed by Derek Paulson or his assistant office manager, Jennifer Wu. But starting 5 months ago, Brennan had signed the inventory checks on multiple occasions. She found the 5 most recent inventory sheets that bore Brennan's signature. She photographed each one, noting the dates. Then she compared those dates against the personal logbook she had found in his locker. On 3 of those inventory dates, Brennan had also recorded tool sales in his private ledger. Back in the office, she requested the security footage archives from Paulson. The system stored video for 90 days. Paulson provided her with the access credentials. Hartley had already begun downloading the raw transaction data from the accounting software onto an external drive. He labeled it and placed it in an evidence bag. Kellogg loaded the security footage archive onto her laptop. She began reviewing the video from 60 days prior, working forward in real time. The file size was enormous, multiple terabytes. She scrolled through at high speed, watching Brennan move through the service bays, the break room, the storage areas. On day 32 in the archive, at 4:53 p.m., she observed Brennan accessing the tool storage alone. No other staff members were visible in the frame. He opened the cabinet with his key and removed items: a socket set, 2 ratchets, and a compression tester. He placed them in a canvas bag. The entire exchange took 4 minutes. He then clocked out at 5:11 p.m., according to the timestamp overlay on the video. She marked the timestamp and continued forward. Similar incidents appeared regularly. Most occurred during evening shifts when Brennan was the only person in the shop. On several occasions, she observed him photographing items with his phone before placing them in the bag. The resolution was poor, but the action was clear. She compiled a list of dates and times where Brennan had removed items. Then she cross-referenced those dates with his personal logbook. The dates matched. The tools he had photographed corresponded with entries in his ledger. Hartley approached with a printout. "I found secondary transactions," he said. "Look at this." The document showed wire transfers from the business account to a separate account labeled Toolhouse Solutions. The account routing number belonged to the same bank where Paulson maintained the primary business account. The transfers had started 7 months ago. 12 transfers in total, ranging from $1,100 to $2,800, for a cumulative total of $18,940. "That's not the resale platform account," Kellogg observed. "No," Hartley said. "It's something else. I checked the bank records. The account was opened in the name of Thomas Brennan. He's the sole authorized user." Kellogg photographed the transfer documentation. Then she asked Paulson, who had remained in the office, if he recognized the account name or had authorized such transfers. Paulson said he had not. He examined the documents with visible shock. He stated that the business account should not have had authorized signatories other than himself. Hartley returned to the computer and accessed the banking portal directly. He pulled up the account details for the Toolhouse Solutions account. The account was registered to a physical address on Maple Street, approximately 4 miles from the shop. The address was listed as a residential property. Kellogg documented the address and the account details. She then opened the email system for the business. Paulson provided her with administrative access. She searched the inbox for communications from or to Thomas Brennan. Most emails were routine, work schedule confirmations, messages about vehicle repairs, standard business correspondence. But in the sent folder, she found 3 emails dated from 6 months ago, before the security footage showed the systematic theft beginning. The emails were sent from Paulson's account, but the content was unusual. One message read, "I need to move inventory faster. Can you handle increased volume?" The recipient was listed as t.brennan@personal.net, a private email address, not the work account. The subsequent replies came from the same address. "Yes, I can manage higher quantities. When do we start?" Paulson stared at the screen. "I didn't send those emails," he said quietly. Hartley examined the email metadata. The messages had originated from Paulson's computer, the one they were currently using. The timestamps showed they were sent at 9:34 p.m., 9:51 p.m., and 10:12 p.m. on dates when Paulson was not scheduled to work. Kellogg photographed the email thread and the metadata headers. In the desk drawer, Underneath a stack of vendor catalogs, she found a handwritten note on lined paper. The handwriting matched Brennan's from the employment file. The note listed tool models, quantities, and dollar amounts. At the bottom of the note was a calculation. 48 items times $285 average equals $13,680. 60% to business, 40% personal, $8,208 split. She photographed the note and placed it in an evidence envelope. The office trash bin contained several crumpled receipts from a hardware store chain located on the highway. The receipts were dated over a span of 4 months. They showed purchases of boxes, packing tape, bubble wrap, and shipping labels. The total amounts ranged from $40 to $180 per transaction. She smoothed each receipt carefully and photographed them. Hartley had located one additional discrepancy. The business had received payments from Northeast Tool Supply totaling approximately $22,000 over the past year. But when he cross-referenced those payments against the actual vendor invoices, the amounts did not match. 3 invoices showed totals of $2,100, but the business account had recorded payments of $2,850. Another showed $1,950 invoiced, but $2,600 paid. The overages, Hartley said, total $8,450. Kellogg did not respond immediately. She stood in the quiet office, reviewing her notes. The accumulation of objects and documented facts formed a shape now, something larger than simple theft. The secondary account, the emails sent from Paulson's computer, the inflated vendor payments, the handwritten calculations dividing profits. The evidence suggested complicity or a deliberate deception designed to appear as complicity. Outside, the sun had moved across the service base. The shop remained silent except for the occasional sound of the compressor cycling on and off, following its mechanical schedule. Marion Kellogg sat in her vehicle outside the address on Maple Street. The property was a single-story residential building with a detached garage. The main house appeared occupied, curtains drawn, a sedan parked in the driveway. The garage door was closed. She photographed the exterior from multiple angles, documenting the address number on the mailbox and the condition of the structure. She did not approach the property. Instead, she drove to the county assessor's office and requested the deed and property records for the address. The documents showed the property was owned by a limited liability corporation registered in Delaware. The registered agent was listed as Toolhouse Solutions, LLC. The ownership structure was opaque, typical of entities designed to obscure the actual beneficial owner. Kellogg photographed the deed pages and the LLC registration documents. Back at her office, she filed a request with the bank that held the Toolhouse Solutions account. The formal subpoena would take time to process, but preliminary information was available. A bank representative confirmed that the account had been opened 18 months ago with an initial deposit of $500. Over the past 7 months, the account had received deposits totaling $47,380 from 2 sources. The wire transfers from Riverside Auto Repair's business account, $18,940, and deposits from the online resale platform, $28,440. The account had maintained a balance above $5,000 at all times. Withdrawals had been minimal, 3 ATM transactions totaling $800. The bank representative stated that the account showed virtually no cash flow except for the deposits and the minimal withdrawals. Most of the funds remained stationary. Kellogg documented the account activity in her case file. She then contacted the online resale platform directly. The company maintained records of all transactions conducted through its system. The account toolhouse_resale had been active for 9 months. It had completed 127 transactions, generating gross sales of $32,840. The average item price was $258. The platform provided shipping address records for all orders fulfilled through the account. Kellogg reviewed the shipping addresses. Most deliveries had gone to residential addresses within a 3-county radius. But 53 transactions, approximately 42% of all sales, had been shipped to a single address, a commercial warehouse facility in an industrial zone 12 miles from Riverside Auto Repair. The facility was listed as Sterling Industrial Storage, Unit 47B. Kellogg called the facility's management office and requested access to the unit under the pretense of investigating a fraudulent lease agreement. She did not provide details about the police investigation. The manager, a woman named Patricia Hammond, stated that Unit 47B was leased to a company called Toolhouse Solutions, LLC. The lease had been in effect for 8 months. The monthly rent was $480, paid consistently via automatic bank transfer. The unit was approximately 200 square feet, small, suitable for equipment or inventory storage. Hammond stated that she had never observed anyone accessing the unit in person. The key fob had been provided to the lessee upon signing. No one had reported any problems or violations. Kellogg obtained a warrant based on the accumulating evidence and the connection between the secondary account, the LLC, the resale platform, and the storage facility. By 2:15 p.m. on Thursday, she arrived at Sterling Industrial Storage with 2 uniformed officers. The facility was a low concrete structure with identical metal doors arranged in a grid pattern. Unit 47B was located along the eastern wall. The door was unmarked. One officer forced the lock while Kellogg documented the action photographically. Inside, the space was illuminated by a single overhead panel. The air was cool and dry, climate-controlled. 3 wooden shelves lined the western wall. The shelves contained tools in their original packaging. Socket sets still in their branded boxes, impact drivers with intact serial numbers, diagnostic equipment wrapped in plastic. Most items bore the Riverside Auto Repair inventory tags that had been photographed in Kellogg's initial search. She counted 38 tool sets on the shelves. She photographed each one, recording the inventory tags and their condition. Most tools appeared in used. Dust had not accumulated on the surfaces. They had been stored here recently, within days of being removed from Riverside Auto Repair. On a folding table in the corner sat a shipping station. Packing tape dispensers, bubble wrap rolls, and branded shipping boxes were organized in a plastic organizer. The boxes bore the logo of the online resale platform. Printed packing slips sat in a stack, held together by a binder clip. The slips showed customer names, addresses, item descriptions, and tracking numbers. The dates ranged across the past 8 months. Kellogg examined the packing slips without handling them. Most were addressed to different locations, but she observed that 6 slips were addressed to the same residential address on Maple Street, the property she had photographed earlier. A cardboard box beneath the table contained cash. Kellogg did not open it, but she photographed it in place and documented its presence. The officers removed the box and counted the contents. It contained $3,200 in mixed denominations. Against the eastern wall stood a desktop computer with a keyboard and monitor. The screen was dark. Kellogg powered it on, wearing gloves. The computer required a password. She did not attempt to access it. Instead, She photographed the hardware and called for a forensic technician to retrieve the machine. Mounted on the wall above the computer was a calendar. Several dates had been circled in pen. The circles corresponded with dates from Brennan's personal logbook and dates when tools had been removed from Riverside Auto Repair according to the security footage. Below the calendar, someone had written in marker, "Increase volume next month. Target $4,000 per week." Kellogg photographed the calendar. She continued to systematically document every object in the unit. A receipt from an office supply store showed the purchase of printer ink, paper, and envelope materials. The receipt was dated 6 weeks ago. A small shelf unit contained files organized in labeled folders: expenses, revenue, shipments, inventory. She did not open the folders, but photographed their arrangement and labels. In a corner of the shelving unit, underneath a rolled-up piece of packing paper, she found a small leather notebook. The first page contained a list of names: Derek Paulson, Jennifer Wu, Michael Foster. Michael Foster's name had been circled twice. Next to it was written, "Payoff, $500 per month. Signed receipt November 3rd. Kellogg photographed the page. Then she carefully examined the remaining pages of the notebook. They contained dated entries spanning 6 months. Most entries recorded tool descriptions, quantities, and dollar amounts, similar to the personal logbook she had found in Brennan's locker, but more detailed. Some entries included handwritten notes. DPW approved this batch. MF covered camera angles. Wu moved payment forward. Kellogg photographed every page of the notebook. The final entry, dated the previous day, read, "Everything in place. Move to phase 2. Distribute shipment and close unit. Brennan transfer complete." She photographed this page twice, ensuring clarity. The unit's lease documents, which management had provided, showed the signature of Thomas Brennan on the rental agreement. The signature matched the handwriting in the notebook. But beneath Brennan's signature, a second signature appeared. It was neat and deliberate. The printed name above it read, "Michael Foster." Kellogg photographed the lease agreement. She had the forensic technician retrieve the computer and the notebooks. She photographed the empty shelves and the shipping station. The cash box was sealed and logged into evidence. The officers conducted a final walkthrough of the unit, looking for additional items. They found nothing else of significance. Back in the vehicle, Kellogg reviewed the photographs on her camera. The accumulation of evidence had shifted the investigation again. The secondary account, the inflated vendor payments, the emails sent from Paulson's computer, these were no longer evidence of Paulson's involvement. They were evidence of something more deliberate. Someone had accessed Paulson's computer. Someone had created false emails to establish a paper trail suggesting complicity. Someone had orchestrated a financial structure designed to obscure the true movement of money. The notebooks indicated that Michael Foster was not a peripheral actor. He had signed the lease. His name appeared throughout the documentation as a participant in the scheme. And according to the employee file Kellogg had reviewed, Michael Foster was the shop's head mechanic. He had worked at Riverside Auto Repair for 4 years. She called Douglas Hartley. She requested that he search the business financial records for any payments to Michael Foster outside of his regular salary. Hartley called back within an hour. The records showed no unusual payments to Foster, but they showed something else. A transfer of $500 to cash on the first Thursday of every month, recorded in the ledger as maintenance supplies. The transfers had been occurring for the past 5 months. Kellogg drove to the Riverside Auto Repair office. Paulson was inside, speaking with Jennifer Wu. Kellogg asked to review the employment file for Michael Foster. The file contained his original job application, his W-2 forms, and his current pay stub. His salary was $3,100 per month before taxes. His listed address was the same residential property on Maple Street. Kellogg photographed Foster's employment file. She then asked Paulson a direct question. Has Michael Foster ever had keys to the tool storage? Paulson answered immediately, yes. He's the head mechanic. He needs access to equipment. He paused. But why? Kellogg did not respond. She was already composing the warrant for Michael Foster's residence and the secondary financial records that would be necessary to trace the full scope of the operation. The evidence had accumulated sufficiently to establish probable cause. But the complete structure of the crime, who had planned it, when it had begun, how deeply Paulson had been deceived, or how willingly he had participated, remained obscured. The shop was silent around them. The fluorescent lights hummed their continuous, indifferent tone. The warrant for Michael Foster's residence was executed at 8:53 a.m. on Friday. Kellogg arrived with 2 officers and a forensic technician. The house on Maple Street appeared unchanged from her earlier observation. The sedan still in the driveway, the curtains drawn. Foster had been contacted through his workplace and instructed to remain at the residence pending the search. He was present when they arrived, his expression neutral, his hands visible. Kellogg conducted the initial walkthrough alone, photographing each room before the officers began systematic searching. The main living area was sparsely furnished, a sofa, a television, a coffee table with scattered mail. The kitchen was clean, with minimal food items in the refrigerator. The bedrooms contained standard furniture. One bedroom appeared unused, with no personal items visible. The second bedroom had been converted into an office space. A desk faced the window. A filing cabinet sat beside it. The walls were bare except for a single calendar identical to the one in the storage unit. Dates circled, handwritten notes in the margins. Kellogg photographed the calendar before touching anything. She opened the filing cabinet. The drawers were organized with meticulous precision. The first drawer contained financial documents, bank statements, tax returns, business licenses. The second drawer held correspondence, letters, invoices, contracts. The third drawer contained printed copies of emails, classified by date and subject matter. Kellogg photographed the organizational system before removing any documents. She extracted the bank statements first. The account statements covered the past 14 months and showed the activity that the bank had described. Deposits from Riverside Auto Repair and the resale platform, minimal withdrawals. But the earliest statements, from 18 months prior, showed different activity. Regular deposits of $3,100, Foster's salary from Riverside Auto Repair, and regular withdrawals of $2,800. The withdrawals ceased abruptly 13 months ago. Kellogg photographed the statements, noting the transition point where the pattern changed. In the second drawer, she found a lease agreement for the storage unit. It bore Foster's signature, as she had observed in the warehouse, but also contained a handwritten amendment dated 7 months prior. The amendment stipulated that the lease would be transferred to a third party within 12 months, and that all contents would be liquidated during that period. The amendment was signed by Foster and by another individual whose signature read James Whitmore. The name matched the reference provided on Thomas Brennan's employment application. Kellogg photographed the amended lease agreement. Then she searched the filing cabinet for any additional documents bearing James Whitmore's name. She found 3 items: a handwritten contract outlining profit-sharing arrangements for a tool acquisition and liquidation operation, a business plan written in narrative form on lined paper, and a series of receipts from restaurant transactions dated over the past 8 months. Each receipt bore 2 names written in pen, M. Foster and J. Whitmore, with handwritten calculations next to them, apparently dividing costs. She photographed each document separately. The contract outlined the operational structure of the scheme. It specified that Thomas Brennan would provide access to inventory, that Michael Foster would coordinate storage and logistics, and that James Whitmore would manage the resale and financial operations. The contract stipulated profit distributions: 40% to Brennan, 35% to Foster, and 25% to Whitmore. It was dated 17 months prior, before the security footage showed Brennan beginning systematic theft, before the secondary bank account had been established, before the storage unit had been leased. The document bore signatures from all 3 individuals, witnessed by an individual whose printed name read Jennifer Wu. Kellogg photographed the contract and documented her observation that the signature next to Jennifer Wu's name was blank. She had not signed. She returned to the bank statements and traced the timeline more carefully. 14 months ago, Foster had closed a personal savings account that had maintained a balance of approximately $8,000. The same week, the Toolhouse Solutions account had been opened with a $500 deposit. 12 months ago, the wire transfers from Riverside Auto Repair had begun. 11 months ago, Foster's regular salary withdrawals had stopped, replaced by the accumulating deposits from the resale platform and the business account transfers. The forensic technician began processing the desktop computer. Kellogg continued searching the filing cabinet. In the 3rd drawer, beneath the printed emails, she found a handwritten journal. The entries were dated and detailed. The first entry, dated 17 months prior, recorded a conversation. Met with JW at Miller's Diner. Discussed opportunity. DPW is vulnerable, overextended, insurance premium increase, worried about cash flow. JW knows DPW from previous business relationship. Says we can exploit this. BR is unsatisfied with salary, wants more. MF is ready. This could work. Next meeting scheduled. Kellogg photographed the journal entry. Subsequent entries documented the planning in granular detail. One entry recorded. Discussed accessing DPW's computer. JW has experience with remote access. Says we can establish email trail suggesting DPW approved higher inventory orders. The vendor payments can be inflated. DPW will see higher costs, but won't question them. He's distracted, dealing with personnel issues. Another entry, dated 10 months prior, noted, BR expressed concerns about exposure. Discussed insurance claim as cover story. JW proposed timing. Take significant quantity. File claim. Blame external theft. DPW's policy covers $10,000 loss. We take $8,000. Sell for $15,000 to $16,000 over time. DPW claims loss. Gets reimbursed. Everyone benefits except insurance company. Yet another entry documented a specific conversation. JW raised concern about Wu. Says she's noticed irregularities in vendor payments. Suggested we bring her in or neutralize her. Decision: offer her $500 per month to sign off on invoices without scrutiny. BR will present it as cost reduction initiative. She agreed. First payment Monday. Kellogg photographed each relevant page of the journal. The final entries from the past 2 weeks indicated a shift in planning. One read, BR getting cold feet. Expressed concern about legal exposure. Reminded him that his signature is on the vendor payments. His computer was used to send emails to JW. His options are limited. He needs to complete the remaining shipments, and then we dissolve the arrangement. Another entry, dated 5 days prior, recorded, JW informed me that Wu wants out. She's uncomfortable with the scope and worried about investigation. Paid her final month's stipend. Need to ensure she stays silent. Discussed with BR, if Wu becomes problem, DPW has documented communication showing he authorized inflated payments. Wu can be isolated as witness or liability. The most recent entry was dated the previous day. Phase 2 beginning. BR handling final inventory transfer. Once warehouse is cleared, unit lease terminates. Funds distributed to offshore account by JW. 3-month timeline before any investigation becomes feasible. By then, accounts will show normal business activity. Ownership of LLC transfers to shell entity in JW's name. Trail effectively obscured. Kellogg photographed the entire final section of the journal. She requested that the forensic technician prioritize access to the desktop computer. While he began his work, Kellogg examined the remaining contents of the filing cabinet. Behind the journal, she found a printed email thread between Michael Foster and James Whitmore, dated 6 months prior. The subject line read, Remote Access Confirmation. The email from Whitmore stated, the software is installed and functioning. I can monitor and access DPW's computer from remote location. System has been tested. Ready to deploy email communications as discussed. The response from Foster read, confirmed. BR is positioned. Wu is compliant. Timeline is accelerating. Proceed with communications plan. Kellogg photographed the email thread. A separate folder contained correspondence between James Whitmore and various individuals with email addresses associated with resale platforms, logistics companies, and financial services. The emails discussed inventory flow, shipping coordination, and account management. Several emails referenced the operation or the project in oblique terms. One email to a shipping logistics company requested expedited handling for shipments, offering payment incentives for rapid processing without documentation scrutiny. Kellogg photographed representative emails from the folder. She opened the desk drawers and found 2 mobile phones, neither registered to Michael Foster according to the device identifiers visible on their backs. Both phones were powered down. She photographed them and secured them in evidence bags without powering them on. The forensic technician reported that the desktop computer was accessible. He had recovered the browsing history, which showed extensive searches related to money laundering, offshore banking, and shell company formation. The search history dated back 14 months. He had also recovered deleted emails from the trash folder, including correspondence with James Whitmore and communications with Thomas Brennan discussing logistics and timing. Kellogg observed the technician's work. He compiled a list of all recovered files and transferred them to an external drive, which he sealed and labeled. She returned to the calendar on the wall. She photographed it from multiple angles. The circled dates corresponded with the entries in the handwritten journal and the dates when Brennan had removed tools from Riverside Auto Repair. The handwritten notes included abbreviated references: BR shipment, Phase 1, JW overseas transition, insurance claim filing. The final circled date was 2 weeks in the future, with the notation final liquidation and distribution. Kellogg asked Michael Foster if he would provide a voluntary statement. Foster declined and requested legal representation. She documented his refusal and continued the search. The officers removed all filing cabinet contents and secured them. The technician removed the desktop computer and the mobile phones. Kellogg conducted a final examination of the room. She found nothing else of immediate significance. The space had been deliberately cleared of personal items. No photographs, no documents bearing other names, no evidence of family or external relationships. It was a functional office, designed to contain and conceal the operation. She photographed the empty room and the walls where the calendar had hung. Before departing, Kellogg requested that Foster's workplace be contacted immediately. Thomas Brennan was to be located and detained pending interview. Jennifer Wu was to be brought in for questioning. James Whitmore's current location and status needed to be determined. In her vehicle, reviewing her notes, Kellogg observed that the evidence had established a clear operational structure. 3 primary actors with defined roles, a 4th actor coerced into complicity through financial incentive, and a 5th actor apparently managing offshore financial operations. The timeline spanned 17 months from initial conception to execution. The planning had been methodical, the operational security deliberate. The scheme had incorporated contingencies, the insurance claim as cover, the manufactured email trail to implicate the business owner, the financial incentive to secure silence from internal staff. But the journal entries and the email communications had also documented a critical vulnerability. The 3 primary actors had maintained detailed records of their planning. They had created a documentary trail that, in their assumption of security within the residential office, had remained accessible to investigation. Kellogg drove to the police station. Multiple interviews needed to be scheduled. Additional warrants needed to be prepared. The investigation had expanded beyond theft into conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and coercion. The complete scope of the operation remained partially obscured. James Whitmore's current location, the offshore account structure, the full extent of the financial transfers. But sufficient evidence had accumulated to establish probable cause for multiple felonies against multiple individuals. The gray afternoon light reflected off the buildings she passed. The city moved around her with ordinary, indifferent momentum. No one outside the investigation recognized what had been uncovered in the quiet office on Maple Street, in the detailed journal entries, in the carefully organized filing system maintained by individuals who had believed themselves secure. Marion Kellogg sat at her desk in the precinct's investigation room. The case files were spread before her in organized piles. Interview transcripts, forensic reports, financial documentation, photographs from the storage unit, pages from the handwritten journals. She had been reviewing the materials for 6 hours, compiling the final narrative that would accompany the criminal complaint. Thomas Brennan had provided a statement within 2 hours of being detained. He had admitted to removing tools from Riverside Auto Repair inventory, but claimed he was acting under duress. He stated that James Whitmore had approached him 3 months into his employment, after observing him complaining about low wages, and had presented the scheme as an opportunity to earn supplemental income. Brennan acknowledged the theft, but asserted that he did not initiate the planning and did not profit equally with the other parties. His account portrayed him as a participant who had been coerced through the promise of financial benefit and the implied threat of exposure. Jennifer Wu had been more evasive. She had initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the ledger entries and the restaurant receipts bearing her initials, had provided a partial statement. She confirmed that Michael Foster had approached her 5 months into the operation and had offered $500 monthly payments in exchange for approving vendor invoices without scrutiny. She stated that she had hesitated but had accepted the arrangement because she was struggling with personal debt related to medical expenses. She claimed ignorance of the full scope of the operation and expressed distress upon learning the true nature of the activities. Michael Foster had remained silent, exercising his right to legal representation. His attorney had filed preliminary motions challenging the search warrant and the seizure of materials from the residence. The legal proceedings would be extended, but the physical evidence was substantial enough to proceed with charges. James Whitmore had not been located. A warrant for his arrest had been issued. His employment history, when traced, showed a pattern of movement between cities every 12 to 18 months. Background checks revealed that he had worked at the tool rental facility where Thomas Brennan had previously been employed, a fact that had not appeared on Brennan's original application but had emerged during subsequent interviews with former coworkers. Kellogg reviewed the statement from the rental facilities manager. The interview had been conducted by a secondary investigator. The manager, a woman named Ruth Hancock, had confirmed that James Whitmore had worked there as a logistics coordinator for 14 months, approximately 2 years prior. She stated that Whitmore had resigned abruptly, citing a desire to pursue independent business ventures. She had noted that his departure occurred shortly after a significant inventory discrepancy had been discovered. Approximately $18,000 in tools had been reported missing over a 2-month period. The rental facility had investigated internally, but had never located sufficient evidence to pursue legal action. The loss had been absorbed as a business expense. Kellogg documented this connection in her notes. The pattern was consistent. Whitmore had identified a target business, cultivated a relationship with an employee who had access to inventory, established a framework for systematic theft, and then departed when the operation reached saturation or when the risk of detection increased. She then reviewed Derek Paulson's statement. The business owner appeared genuinely shocked by the revelation that his computer had been accessed remotely and that communications bearing his signature had been sent without his knowledge. Forensic analysis of his computer confirmed Whitmore's remote access. The software had been installed 14 months prior, during a period when Paulson had taken a week-long vacation to visit family out of state. Whitmore had apparently entered the office after business hours. He had been photographed on security footage, though not clearly enough for positive identification, accessing the building through an unlocked rear entrance at 11:30, 4 p.m. one evening. Paulson had cooperated fully with the investigation. He had provided account information, email credentials, and access to all business systems. He had expressed confusion and regret regarding the vendor payments that had been conducted in his name. He had stated that he had noticed increasing costs, but had attributed them to inflation and market conditions. He had not questioned the payments because cash flow pressure from his recent business expansion had occupied his attention. Kellogg examined the business expansion documentation. Paulson had invested approximately $45,000 in upgrading diagnostic equipment and expanding his service base 18 months prior. The expansion had required taking on additional debt. Monthly cash flow had been strained as the new equipment was being paid off. The financial vulnerability that Whitmore had exploited, that the journal had documented, was legitimate. She organized her findings into a chronological summary. 17 months prior, James Whitmore had identified Derek Paulson's business as a target. Whitmore had known Michael Foster through previous criminal association or employment context. Whitmore had made contact with Foster, proposing a systematic theft operation. Foster had agreed, motivated by financial strain and the promise of substantial profit distribution. Foster had then identified Thomas Brennan as a potential third participant. Brennan was dissatisfied with his compensation and vulnerable to the suggestion of supplemental income. Whitmore had remotely installed software on Paulson's computer, establishing access that would allow him to send communications appearing to come from the business owner. The operation had been designed to appear, if discovered, as if Paulson himself had authorized inflated vendor payments in order to create an internal fund for the theft and resale operation. 13 months prior, the systematic removal of tools had begun. Brennan had accessed inventory during evening shifts. Foster had coordinated storage and logistics through the warehouse unit. Whitmore had managed the resale platform, the offshore account, and the financial distribution. The operation had accelerated as confidence increased and as market demand for used tools remained steady. 6 months prior, when Jennifer Wu had discovered the vendor payment irregularities, Foster had approached her directly and had offered financial compensation for her silence. Wu had accepted, motivated by personal financial difficulty and the apparent low risk of simple complicity in what appeared to be internal cost management practices. 3 months prior, when Thomas Brennan had expressed anxiety about legal exposure, Whitmore had reinforced Brennan's commitment through a reminder of his documented signature on vendor payments and his presence on security footage. Brennan had continued participating. 2 weeks prior, Whitmore had initiated the final phase, rapid liquidation of remaining inventory in the warehouse, transfer of accumulated funds to offshore accounts, and preparation for dissolution of the operational structure. The timeline in the journal had projected that by the time any investigation became feasible, the trail would be sufficiently obscured that prosecution would be difficult. Kellogg laid out the financial records in chronological order. The account statements from Toolhouse Solutions showed deposits from Riverside Auto Repair totaling $18,940 and deposits from the resale platform totaling $32,840. The total accumulated value was $51,780. According to the profit-sharing contract, the distribution would have been approximately $20,712 to Brennan, $18,123 to Foster, and $12,945 to Whitmore, with unaccounted variance due to operational expenses. She paused. She reviewed the contract again. The contract stipulated specific percentages of profit distribution. It had been signed 17 months prior, but the most recent journal entry, dated 2 days ago, had referenced a different distribution arrangement. The entry read, JW offshore account finalized. 3 accounts established, 1 for each of us, proportional distribution as contracted. Final amounts will be determined once all inventory is liquidated. Kellogg checked the timeline for the final warehouse inventory count. The forensic accounting had documented that 53 items remained in the unit when the warrant was executed. The items had been appraised at a market value of approximately $13,400. If those items had been sold through the resale platform at the historical average price, the proceeds would total approximately $15,200. She calculated the revised total accumulated value, $51,780 plus the projected $15,200 from remaining inventory equaled $66,980. Distributed according to the profit-sharing percentages, Brennan would receive approximately $26,792. Foster would receive approximately $23,443, and Whitmore would receive approximately $16,745. But Kellogg observed something in the journal entries that did not align with the profit-sharing contract. In the entries documenting James Whitmore's planning with Michael Foster, prior to Brennan's recruitment, the language had been different. One entry read, JW controls financial infrastructure. His percentage determines operational viability. Proposed 50% for JW, 30% for MF, 20% for BR once BR is recruited. The percentages in that early journal entry did not match the signed contract, which stipulated 25% for Whitmore, 35% for Foster, and 40% for Brennan. Kellogg retrieved the original contract document and photographed it again. She examined the signatures. Thomas Brennan's signature was clear and legible. Michael Foster's signature was present. James Whitmore's signature was also present. But she noticed something she had not observed during the initial review. Beside Whitmore's signature, in parentheses, was a notation. The notation read, Agent. Kellogg consulted the business law resources available in the investigation room. She determined that an agent signature on a contract indicated that the individual was signing on behalf of another entity or principal, not in their personal capacity. The contract, therefore, might not have been a simple three-party agreement as she had initially interpreted. She reviewed the banking records again. The Toolhouse Solutions LLC had been opened 18 months prior with an initial deposit of $500. The sole authorized user was listed as Thomas Brennan, but the account had been established at a bank branch located 40 miles from Riverside Auto Repair in a different county. The account opening application bore Brennan's signature, but the address listed on the application was not Brennan's residence. It was a mailbox service in a commercial center. Kellogg contacted the mailbox service. The records showed that the mailbox had been rented using a business name, JW Financial Services. The renter's contact information listed a phone number that had been disconnected and an email address that had been inactive for months. She then examined the bank statements for the Toolhouse Solutions account more carefully. The account had been established by Brennan, but the first communication about account management had come from an IP address that forensic analysis had traced to a location in Portland, Oregon, where James Whitmore had worked at another tool rental facility 5 years prior. Kellogg reviewed the email communications recovered from Michael Foster's desktop computer. In one email thread, Whitmore had written to Foster, "Account is established in BR's name. He is primary on the signature card, but I have access authority through power of attorney documentation. His role is operational. He accesses inventory, coordinates timing. His role is not financial. Financial management remains with me." The follow-up email from Foster read, "Understood. BR is Shield. All distributions flow through accounts I and you control." Kellogg then looked at the distributed funds. According to the bank records, the accumulated $51,780 had been transferred out of the Toolhouse Solutions account in 3 transactions. The first transfer, 2 weeks prior, had moved $18,000 to a different account, an account registered to Michael Foster. The second transfer, 1 week prior, had moved $17,280 to another account, registered to James Whitmore. The final transfer, 4 days prior, had moved the remaining $16,500 to a third account. Kellogg requested additional documentation regarding the third account. The bank representative confirmed that the account was registered to Thomas Brennan at his personal address, but the account had been opened remotely, using online banking services, from an IP address that traced back to Portland, Oregon. The account had been accessed only once, to receive the $16,500 transfer. It had not been accessed since. The realization accumulated gradually, then crystallized with absolute clarity. James Whitmore had designed the entire operation as a mechanism to exploit Michael Foster and Thomas Brennan. The profit-sharing contract, signed 17 months prior, had specified percentages that appeared equal and fair. But Whitmore had signed the contract as an agent, not as a personal participant, but as a representative of some other entity whose identity remained obscured. The banking structure had been deliberately constructed to place Brennan as the primary account holder. His signature was on all official documents. His name appeared on the lease agreement. His presence was on security footage removing tools. His role was operational, visible, exposed, vulnerable to legal liability. But the financial control had remained with Whitmore and Foster. The accumulated funds had been distributed in such a manner that Whitmore received the largest actual sum, $17,280, despite the contract allocating him the smallest percentage. Foster received the second largest, $18,000, and Brennan receives the smallest sum actually accessible to him. The $16,500 held in an account opened remotely from locations where Whitmore had previously worked. Whitmore had engineered the discovery. The insurance claim filed by Derek Paulson would trigger investigation. The investigation would focus on Thomas Brennan, the employee present on security footage, the individual whose name appeared on account documentation, the person whose signature existed on the lease. Foster would be implicated, but would appear to be a secondary participant. Whitmore, managing the operation from remote locations, would remain obscured. Kellogg examined the journal entries one final time. She focused on the final entries, the ones discussing Phase 2 and the offshore account transitions. The entries were written in Michael Foster's handwriting, but the language and the planning logic reflected Whitmore's strategic perspective. The journal was Foster's record, but it was documenting Whitmore's design. She pulled the amended lease agreement. The amendment, signed 6 months prior, had specified that the storage unit would be transferred to a third party and that all contents would be liquidated within 12 months. The amendment had been signed by Foster and by James Whitmore. But the amendment also included a clause stipulating that upon termination, the unit would be released from the lease with no forwarding address required and no continued liability. Kellogg understood the implication. James Whitmore had built a timeline into the operation itself. The unit lease would terminate. The inventory would be liquidated. The funds would be distributed and moved to offshore accounts. All physical evidence would be eliminated. The LLC would dissolve. Whitmore would depart. Michael Foster would remain as the operational coordinator, present, documented, available to law enforcement. Thomas Brennan would remain as the visible principal, signature on documents, presence on footage, name on accounts. Jennifer Wu would remain as a coerced witness, frightened and potentially unreliable. James Whitmore would vanish into the geography of his previous movements, leaving behind 3 individuals with varying levels of documented participation and no clear evidence of his own active involvement beyond the recovered digital communications and the journal entries that Foster had maintained. Kellogg composed her final investigative summary. She documented the evidence of conspiracy, the financial structure designed to obscure primary culpability, the methodical exploitation of more vulnerable individuals, and the deliberate engineering of discovery. She noted that James Whitmore had utilized his understanding of business operations, his access to technology, and his prior experience with similar operations at other tool rental facilities to design an elaborate scheme that was less about simple theft than about systematic fraud and the calculated manipulation of individuals and institutions. She noted that the motive was straightforward: financial gain through a carefully structured illegal operation that diversified risk among multiple actors while concentrating control and profit in a single individual. The operation represented the culmination of a pattern. Whitmore had performed similar activities at the rental facility, had evaded prosecution and had simply replicated the methodology at a new target location with improved operational security. The evidence was sufficient to support charges against all parties. Multiple felony counts: theft, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, computer fraud, and coercion. The prosecution would be complex. Whitmore remained at large, but the documentary trail was clear. The contract that had seemed to divide culpability equally had actually been a mechanism to concentrate it among three individuals while reserving true control for a fourth. Kellogg filed her report. She then contacted the lead prosecutor and provided a summary of her findings. She recommended that charges be prepared for all four individuals: Brennan, Foster, Wu, and Whitmore, with emphasis on Whitmore's role as the primary architect and beneficiary. She submitted the case to the prosecutor's office and closed her investigation notebook. The office around her remained quiet. The afternoon light had shifted across her desk. The files and photographs and documents that had occupied weeks of methodical searching and logical deduction were now consolidated into a narrative of criminal activity. The evidence supported prosecution. The outcome remained uncertain. Legal proceedings would unfold through systems beyond her authority. But the investigative work was complete. She had traced the thread of physical evidence and documented fact through the complexity of financial records and operational planning. The thread led to James Whitmore, to a pattern of behavior, to a calculated exploitation of vulnerability, and to a crime that was neither simple nor impulsive, but deliberate and architecturally precise. Kellogg saved her case file and prepared it for archival storage. The investigation was closed. The case would now proceed to courts and prosecutors and judges and juries. Her role in uncovering the truth had concluded. She returned to her desk and reviewed the incoming case assignments. There were always more investigations to begin, more evidence to examine, more narratives of criminal activity waiting to be uncovered through the patient accumulation of facts.